Good morning. We're here with the Veterans History Project to interview Mr. Don Waful. The date is August 12th, 2016, and we're in Syracuse, New York. Could you tell us your full name with middle initial for the record, please?
Donald Roy Waful,
And when were you born?
April 8th, 1916,
And where were you born?
Newark, New York.
Okay. What were the names of your parents?
My dad was J. Fred Waful, and my mother was Harriet York Waful.
Were they born here or did they immigrate?
My mother came over from Canada. My dad was raised in Watertown, New York, and Mom came over here to, she was one of 11 children, came over to make her way in this country. Met my dad in northern New York.
Mm-hmm. What did your dad do for a living?
He worked for Uncle Sam. He was chasing the bad guys in the early days of Prohibition. That was an interesting job that he had.
Mm-hmm. All right. And so you were born in Newark. When did you actually move to Syracuse?
When I was 1 year old, that was from my dad's place of domicile for his new job.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had one sister 3 years younger than me. Her name is Melva, and she died some years ago. But no other siblings.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what was the name of your wife?
Well, her name was Olga Cassiolini Waful.
Okay. And how about your children? How many kids did you
Well,
have?
number one son, who is still alive, he's going to be 70 this month. His name is Peter J. J-A-Y. And then there was Donald Roy Waful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. All right. Let's kind of move fast forward to around the time of Pearl Harbor. Give us an idea of what was going on in your life just before Pearl Harbor started.
Well, that was a very interesting date for a lot of reasons, because I was of draft age, and another one, a buddy of mine, was the same thing. In 1941, right after the Congress passed the Draft Act, we were sure that we were going to be one of the early draftees because we were single and healthy. So in summer of 1941, we figured that we were going to get into this war, and we decided that we would do better off by enlisting in the regular army for a 4-year enlistment rather than a 1-year draft, because in the regular army we had some choices, and our gamble was that somehow we were going to get in that war. 1941, it was a very hot war in Europe. And so we did. We enlisted in the regular army, went to Pine Camp, now Camp Drum, up in northern New York, where we joined the brand new fledgling new 4th Armored Division, which became a major outfit in Patton's 3rd Army after the invasion of Normandy. But so we went down to, I was sent down there to go to tech mechanic school, which was a very interesting change from my college education.
And were you in college at the time?
Well, no, I was working. I graduated from college in '37 and then a master's degree in '39. So by 1941, I was working.
So tell us just a little bit about your educational background and what you were doing.
Well, I was in the Maxwell School at Syracuse as a major for undergraduate, with a kind of an interest in international relations and international affairs. And I did a degree on the Republic of Liberia in Africa, which was an interesting project that involved the Firestone Rubber Company. But I did a master's degree in the field of international affairs. That was why it was very strange to me when we finally did get in the Army that Uncle Sam thought I should go down to Fort Knox in Kentucky and learn to be a tank mechanic. It didn't seem to fit. Mm-hmm. But while I was there for a month, the notice went up in the game room at the school. The class number 3 of the officer candidate school for the Armored Force was being formed, and I said, well, that's for me. I applied for that, and they couldn't wait to get their hands for the officer training for a guy who had a master's degree in international affairs. So I joined class number 3 in Fort Knox, and believe it or not, to get back to your question, the 3rd week of that 12-week course was Pearl Harbor, and that changed everything for obvious reasons.
Sure.
So that class was a 12-week course. We were class number 3. There was only 60 guys in it, And when we graduated in February, they took 45 of us and assigned us to the 1st Armored Division. At that point in history, we only had 2.5 armored divisions in the whole United States Army. We had the First Armored Division there at Fort Knox. We had the 2nd Armored Division, which was at Fort Benning in Georgia, and its commander was George Patton. We had a fledgling 3rd Armored Division down in Louisiana, the 3rd Armored Division, which was not ready yet. It was just in training. So they assigned us to the 1st Armored Division in March of 1942. Sent us to New Jersey, stuck us on the Queen Mary, and by May we were in North Ireland.
Tell us a little bit about your training. Once you at Fort Knox, and what did they teach you? What was going on?
Well, at Fort Knox, of course, you did a lot of training to be an officer, and strangely enough, a lot of it was book learning. And we didn't do very much of actually field training. In other words, we didn't learn how to drive a tank. We didn't know how the engines worked. We learned a little bit about tactics and how to function as an armored unit. But it was a lot of it was book learning. Learning, as the Southern kids in the OCS class called it. And we did take a big hike, 25-mile hike every Friday afternoon after classes, but it was a book training more than actual field training. So that when we were assigned to the 1st Armored Division, the 45 of us were spread all the way through all of the units of the 1st any armored division. And it could have been artillery, could have been infantry, it could have been reconnaissance, it could be medics, it could be ordnance, and I picked the headquarters company because when we had been assigned up at Pine Camp when we first entered in the Army up there was the brand new 4th Armored Division. I was in the headquarters company, so I went overseas doing the same thing that I'd done here in the States in a headquarters company. And the trouble with the headquarters company is you don't learn anything about how an armored division tank company actually fights its battles and does its training and does its missions and learns how to use the vehicles and how to organize them and how to plan an attack and how to defend against one. In headquarters company, you just take care of the commanding officers and his staff and defend them if they need it, or take them someplace with a reconnaissance platoon if they were going. So that I have to say that when I went overseas, I had no boot camp training or no company training of any kind, because headquarters company, you don't do it.
So you were you given a rifle, or did?
Oh no, nothing, no.
Nothing, but
no.
yet you might have had to protect them at some point.
Well, some of the guys, the rifles, no. Some of the fellows they had Tommy guns, but we weren't supposed to really. The headquarters tank platoon was 5 light tanks like any of the combat units had, but they had a 37 millimeter gun in the turret, and it had a regular machine gun. But we were not supposed to be infantry guys. We were supposed to be a tank platoon.
So in theory, ideally, that last line of defense was only if the main line of resistance failed.
That's right. If the enemy broke through and was going to overrun or try to capture or otherwise destroy headquarters, then we were supposed to come into action. And so if everything failed up front, we could get involved, and that was rare. In other words, we didn't really have much to do.
Okay. So let's go back to, you said it was, what vessel were you on from New York?
It was the Queen Mary.
Queen Mary. Tell us a little bit about the Queen Mary and that trip.
Well, that was an amazing trip. It was 10,000 troops on the one ship. In early 1942, the Atlantic, and particularly North Atlantic, was swarming, literally swarming, with German submarines. They were sinking convoys, taking stuff to England like right and left. And the few ships that went out to the Atlantic, they went with convoy and protection. The Queen Mary goes by herself. She can go 35 knots. She can outrun any submarine. So we sailed out of the North Atlantic on the Queen Mary with 10,000 troops all by ourselves. So we kind of sweat that out a little bit. We got there safely. It took 5 days. Usually a convoy would take maybe twice as long, 7 days, 10 days. In fact, the Queen Mary survived the war.
That's quite fast for a ship even today.
Well, it would change directions every 4 or 5 minutes, and then every once in a while it would stop because the radar on the Queen Mary would contact something or be contacted, and they would stop, and then they would start up again.
All right, and the U-boats were quite a bit slower.
Yes, that's right. So it was a calculated risk, and the Army made it work because nobody ever did catch the Queen Mary.
Yeah. How were the accommodations? How did they treat you on board?
Well, that was it's terrible. You know that Queen Mary at one point in time, getting ready for the invasion of Normandy, carried 19,000 people, and that was because every cot, every room had 2 people in the same bed, not at the same time.
Just hot bunking them.
But in other words, you had it in the daytime and I had it at night.
Yeah.
Food for the troops was rare, and it was terrible, and it could only be soupish, and it was there's no way you could feed 10,000 men like we had, or the 19,000. The peacetime dining rooms were maintained in the peacetime style, so that those of us who were brand new officers or any kind of officers, we ate pretty well. But the troops, and I was still feeling like a sergeant when I was a second lieutenant on that Queen Mary. But my sympathies were with those troops because they just had to live with what they could get, which was not often and not good.
Mm-hmm. How was the weather going across?
Good.
Good. Yeah.
No trouble.
Remember what time of year it was? What?
It was we sailed on Mother's Day in early May of 1942.
When you actually left home for either Europe or for your first training, what did your mom and dad say to you? What kind of comments did they have? Was it an emotional departure? How'd it go?
Well, I was raised by my mom. My dad died when I was 7, and my mother married again 4 years later. He was a marvelous guy, and I loved him, but he was never my father. So I was raised by my mom, and so when I told her that that I and another guy, the young man that she knew very well, we went to the same church, that we were going to quit our jobs and join the regular army because we knew we were going to get drafted, and that we'd be leaving, leave because I was still sleeping in the same room that I'd grown up in as a high school kid at home. Mm-hmm. And she just accepted it. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She didn't break down and cry. She just said, if that's what you have to do and what you want to do, go ahead.
She was probably quite proud of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess so.
Yeah. Now, you had said you talked about your education before you went. You had quit work. What were you doing? What was your job?
When I went in the Army, I was working for the United Way. I was going to be one of the professional fundraiser and the permanent United Way staff, and I had gone through one campaign, and I was learning how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, very good. So you were headed for your career, and you interrupted it to help your country. Okay, so you're over there, and you landed where in
Well, we landed in Liverpool, I think, or Scotland. It was Scotland. We landed in Scotland, and immediately took some lighters and some small ships, and moved over to Belfast in North Ireland. North Ireland is part of England. Mm-hmm. It's a county down, and it's part of the British Empire. And so we landed just long enough to leave the Queen Mary, take small ships, and take it into Belfast, and they sent us to a regular British Army armor post called Ballykindler, which was a permanent outpost of the British Army And that's where of course, there was no camp in all of North Ireland. It could take 10,000 troops from the 1st Armored Division, including we had about 400 tanks and a lot of infantry and artillery and reconnaissance troops. The Armored Division at that time was a composite of a lot of kinds of army, like I said, infantry and recon and artillery, as well as tanks and ordnance and everything that you need to take care of armor. And so they were scattered all over North Ireland, some here, some there.
And the men were living in tents, or
no, there was enough army installations around North Ireland of a permanent nature that they could find a place to house these American troops.
Okay. All right. So, what were your duties there we'll just walk through this chronologically. What were your duties initially in Ireland?
Well, here again, we settled down there in the summer of 1942. There were no troops, American troops, in action anywhere in Europe or Africa. All the fighting was being done in the Pacific. So the various units set up regular training programs to do their thing all over North Ireland. The tanks practiced tank battles. The artillery, how to move from one place to another. The infantry did infantry tactics all over. Headquarters people didn't do anything because our job was purely defensive. If we went out in the territory to do a test or a program, we just went along with them and set up a defense like you would in a combat thing, except there wasn't any fighting to be done over there in North Ireland, but we had to pretend like it, so we just set up a defense. And I don't need to make a joke about it. The only time that we did anything was on the days when they passed out candy bars, and it was the kids, the guys had food or a drink, and once a month, more like home. There wasn't very much. There was no training. That's the point I wanted to make to you. That we at Headquarters Company, you did no unit training to learn how to be what the various segments of an armored division were, infantry or armor, whatever.
So day to day, how did you actually pass the time?
Well, I switched back and forth between the tank platoon and the reconnaissance platoon. When I was with the tank platoon, we just drove the tanks and went off into the fields and maneuvered the tanks so that the drivers and the people could get used to handling a tank, how to drive it, how to maneuver it, how to back it up, how to turn. Just get used to the vehicle itself, and we just kind of made up our own. And the rest of the time, we would take care of the engine, take care of the ammunition, keep that clean, and just filled in time. It was kind of a blank spot in the whole armored force structure at that time, that they had no program to train those troops who were at headquarters that weren't there for jobs to do in terms of command facilities and that sort of thing, like the tank platoon and the reconnaissance platoon. We had no program of training.
Do you recall the name of your commander? Who ran the show?
Yeah, well, I can remember the regimental commander was Paul Robinett, R-O-B-I-N-E-T-T, Robinett. He was a regular Army guy. Nice man. I have some stories about Robinett I could tell. But
Yeah, tell us stories about him. That's always interesting when we have some,
well,
information about
well, I guess any army career is full of interesting little sidelights. So you've asked me to tell you one. I'll tell you one, and you can use it if you like. Being in a headquarters company, the colonel had a driver. He was a Private Lee, and of course I knew him because we were all a member of headquarters company. There came a time out there to this camp where we were 35 miles from Belfast, and we were going to have a regimental dance, the officers, and we would invite the nurses to come out from the base hospital in Belfast so that the officers would have somebody to dance with. So a bunch of nurses came out for that particular night, and I had met one of those nurses, which is another story. But I knew one of those nurses, and she came out there. The girls came out in the ambulances and danced with our guys. And during the course of the evening, the colonel's driver said to me, he knew that I was interested in one of the nurses. He said, "Why don't we just take the colonel's car, and I'll drive you and the nurse back to Belfast, and she won't have to. You'll be able to spend some more time with her, and she won't have to drive back in the ambulances." And I said, he said, "The colonel won't know anything about it." He said, "I've got the keys to the car." So we did that. We literally stole the regimental commander's car and drove back to Belfast, and then back home, back to the camp. And exactly 9 minutes after I got back in my room in bed, there was one of the brass hats called a regimental alert. And everybody that had been at the party, and there'd been some partying by the officers, had to report to their companies, start all their vehicles, do what they're supposed to do. And it was a kind of a riotous situation because it was at the end of a nice party. And some of the brass hats didn't like the fact that these guys, it was kind of like the Pearl Harbor syndrome. We weren't ready to fight a war in the middle of the night after a party. Mm-hmm. And so I had to go back to headquarters. And I, of course, by that time, Private Lee had the colonel's car back in where it was supposed to be. And I missed. In other words, I didn't get in trouble. But I have to tell you, the follow-up on that is after the war was over, and I went down to Washington to go to the National Red Cross Convention. This is peacetime now. And Colonel Robinette, who was the colonel, was in the historical section, and I got a hold of him, and I said I would like to see the colonel again, in peacetime. And so we had lunch. And I told him, I said, "Colonel, I have a confession to make." I said, "Do you remember that alert that we did?" And so on. And he said, "Oh, yes." He said, and I said, "Well, Private Lee and I had your car that night. We drove it to Belfast and back." And he said, "If I'd have known that," he said, "I'd have court-martialed you." So that's a great memory.
Yeah.
And then we both laughed, and because it was he said he was serious. He would have court-martialed us. Mm-hmm.
Well, you had to maintain order back then,
yeah.
right?
So whether you do that's part of my history. That event to take your favorite girlfriend in the backseat of it was a 1942 sedan made the last ones made by the Chevy people. It was painted OD color, but it was a regular civilian car. Hmm. So.
And what does OD stand for? You said OD color? Is that like a green?
Well,
like
it's more brown. I can't tell you what OD means.
It was kind of like an Army color.
It was Army color.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
That's the best way to say it. Yes.
Yep. All right. Okay, so you're in Ireland. Any more comments on Ireland, or if not, let's move to the next stop.
Well, we were in Ireland all summer from let's say May till September, October, and all the outfits were doing their training, except us headquarters people were doing nothing, because we didn't have any program. But the regular units were training same as if they were back in the States. Then they moved the whole division over to Scotland, because we knew that we weren't going to spend the rest of the war in North Ireland. And they moved us over to Scotland, and then down into England. And things began to, they stepped up the training. This was late 1942. And everybody thought that maybe something was getting to be, serious. So they had to. They knew that something was. We knew that something was cooking. They were going to take the First Armored Division and give it some action. Well, what happened then was, of course, was the invasion of North Africa. That was done in November of 1942, and so there was a lot of training all over England. There were two convoys that were prepared to sail to Africa. One was based in Liverpool, England, and the other was in Glasgow, in Scotland. And so when the time came, now at that point in time we knew we were going someplace, and we loaded up the ships in those two cities, and we didn't know until we got out to sea. And then the people in command of each ship then could open up the orders and read them, and then we knew where we were going. All we knew was when we sailed out of that harbor, we didn't know where, because that was part of security.
Sure.
So then we learned that we were going to go to North Africa, and that was a huge operation, because there was those two convoys. One convoy went to Algiers, another one went to Oran. Then one convoy came from the States, and that went to Casablanca, and there was 150,000 guys, and that was the way the war started in Europe for us, with two huge convoys making three big attacks in North Africa: Oran, Algiers, and Casablanca. That was huge. Yeah. And so we were of course, we went out to the North Atlantic. Those big convoys we had escorts, of course. We were 17 days at sea. I was in the convoy that went to Oran, and those were supposed to be 3-day units activities, because we had to take the airports of Algiers, Oran, and Casablanca, because on the third day the paratroopers were going to be flying out of England and land at those airports, and we had to take them. Mm-hmm. And we did. So, and we had that was a very interesting political thing, because this North Africa had been operated and functioned through the French, and of course they lost the war in the Battle of France. So the Germans kind of let the French keep some kind of nominal defensive facilities in case anything happened. They didn't have money. They didn't have any. They had the French Foreign Legion, which I happened to see one day when I was out looking around. I saw the French Foreign Legion operating. We were afraid about them, and that but the Lafayette. We were here. We didn't think that when we landed, Americans landed in North Africa under French control, that they wouldn't shoot at us. You know, Lafayette back in the Revolution, mm-hmm. And in World War I, we went over there and helped them win World War I, and we were great buddies. They needed us, and we needed them, and we didn't think that they would shoot at us. A lot of the American troops that landed in North Africa, and this was November the 8th, 1942, had American flags on their sleeves. Mm-hmm. Our unit did not, but many of them did. Well, the French troops defending those harbors had to fire back, because I don't know whether you want to get into this political part of it or not, but
sure.
Well, in 1940, when France was overwhelmed by the Germans, Dunkirk and all that business, the Germans saved part of France and kept it from not being occupied. There was, with the capital at Vichy, V-I-C-H-Y, the Vichy France is part of history, because that's where what was left of France was left without being occupied. And Marshal Pétain, who's the hero of the Battle of Verdun in the World War I, they shall not pass. Marshal Verdun was the nominal head of the Vichy French government, which existed only at the pleasure of the Germans. So Pétain had sent orders out through every part of Vichy France that if anybody tried to disturb our activities, we have to shoot at them, because he knew that if they didn't resist, the Germans would say, well, that's the end of Vichy France. You're supposed to shoot at these guys, because they are our enemies. They're not your enemies, but they're ours. But you guys got to shoot at them. Terrible political problem. So the French did shoot at us at Iran, Algiers, Casablanca, and we suffered some casualties.
How was the resistance? Was it?
Well,
they
didn't have very much in the way of artillery or troops, but so it was kind of stiff for a little bit, but for a day or two. In other words, we took the Iran airport by the third day. Casablanca was a little tougher. That was Patton's outfit, which came directly from the States. But so it was unfortunate that they had to make a resistance, because they were as part of Vichy France, and Vichy France and Pétain existed only at the pleasure of the Germans.
So they didn't have a choice.
And they had no choice.
Yeah. All right. So once you came ashore in that area, you what did they have you doing at that point? You set up another headquarters, or how did
Well, that's good. We were only there about a week or 10 days. One of the interesting things that happened to me, that I did, they gave me a couple of jeeps and a day, about 7 or 8 different men, and some British Army rations, and they gave me a map of some inland countryside in North Africa, in Algeria, and the idea was to show the American flag to the interior natives. So, in other words, I was to take this to two vehicles and the soldiers, and just prop the flag up so they could wave and just let the countryside see it. And it was during that trip that we passed by the French Foreign Legion. We could see them just like in the movies training down there, and they saw us, we waved at them, and they waved at us. Because they kept right on training. They never did try to, when we attacked there, they did not try to come and stop us. They just kept on training. But they waved at us, we waved at them. So the idea was just to show the flag. Then at the end of that, a week or 10 days, we're now maybe 1,000 miles from Tunisia. So they started feeding our units overland, and some by sea and some by train, to get to Tunisia. And now here again, to put that in proper focus, if you needed the full story, this whole North African concept was that because of the relationship between Lafayette and the French and us, we'd made that original attack at those cities. The idea then was for the British Army to take over, go over to Tunisia, and meet up with Montgomery and the 8th Army, which had been over in the desert, over in defending the Suez Canal and Egypt. And they were finally, they'd been taking a lot of beatings over there for a couple of years, but they started to fight back and came across North Africa towards us, and we were going to meet with them in Tunisia and destroy Rommel and the Africa Corps, which had been dominating North Africa for a long time with the British. They had a separate war over there with the Rommel and Montgomery. So in other words, the British were supposed to take over at Iran and Algiers and moved over to Tunisia to take the city of Tunis, because the German army was a couple of 100,000 men, and if you took a big port like Tunis, there was no way they could get out and vacate the continent. In other words, you had to take the back door away from them. So it was a pincer movement that covered a couple of 1,000 miles from Egypt over to Tunisia. It was a long way. And so we were trying to get to, the British were trying to get to Tunis before the Germans did. The Germans, all they had to do was, they were in Sicily, and for the Sicily over to Tunisia was just a half-hour trip. We had to come 1,000 miles. And some of us Americans went with them, went with the British. So when we went over there with some of our vehicles, we were under British command because it was now a British operation, and so we did what the British said to do. We ate British rations, and of course that was a campaign over there that was disastrous for Americans at first because we didn't know how to fight a war, and the Germans beat the hell out of us. And that was where I got involved, which they ran into a problem. The Americans ran out of troops, and that's where they took my 4 vehicles actually, and they gave us a mission to do because there was nobody else, and we weren't supposed to fight anybody.
So you weren't really trained for that.
We weren't trained for that, but they sent me on a mission. It was supposed to be kind of like what you call a milk run, and I never came back.
Well, let's get into that and see what.
Well, that was I don't know what I'm supposed to say about that. It was.
Well, tell us just walk through the events that took place.
Well, it's I had a tank platoon of. This was like I say, it's supposed to be a milk run, and there was about 12 miles, an area 12 miles away from my headquarters. I had one vehicle was down the road gassing up, and I said, "Am I supposed to wait for my 5th tank?" They said, "Nah, they're getting nervous down there where I'm sending you. You're going to have to go down there and pacify them. So just take your 4 and go." Now there's a sidelight to this that's interesting. That kind of proves the point that it was a milk run. We had a young French civilian who was had attached himself to our headquarters, and he was a native of the city of Tunis, and he had attached himself to us so that in the event that we were successful and captured the city of Tunis, he knew the city, and he could direct our people. This is where this is, and this is where that is. And so he was just hanging around in case he was needed at that point in time. He said, that guy, he spoke pretty good English. He heard the instructions that I was given by the American captain. And he said, "Can I go along on it?" He said, "Doesn't amount to much." He said, "Can I go along for the ride?" And Captain Long said to me, he said, "Do you mind?" And I said, "No, I don't mind. If he wants to come for a ride, come." So he came with me. He got captured too. Because in fact, there was more action down there. We went to 12 miles, and there was a lot of action down there that nobody knew about. After the war, I wrote a letter to the guy that sent me on that mission, and he wrote back. This was in peacetime. He said, "I didn't know there were any Germans down there where I sent you."
So tell us how that unfolded.
Well, I don't
got
want
into
to.
some trouble.
All I can tell you is that our 4 tanks ran smack dab into one full company of German tanks and a bunch of infantry guys. And in North Africa at that point in time, this is December. They don't have snow down there; they have a lot of rain. And so they'd had a lot of rain, and when I got there, there was one bunch of infantry guys that had been there, were being broken up and driven back. They were all running, and they pointed to me, waved me, "Get off the road, get off the road, get off the road," because the Germans were coming down the road. So I got off the road and bogged down 4 tanks. And the mud was. And we just couldn't do anything.
What tanks did they have? They were quite a bit bigger than ours, correct?
Well, they were better. They were what they call Mark IVs, and I can't tell you they were a basic tank. They weren't the big Panther, the Tigers. They were not that big, but they were the middle of the road thing. Ours were the old-fashioned light tanks with a 37 millimeter gun, which is a pea shooter.
It bounced right off their tank.
Oh yeah, but I had no training, and I fired a couple of shots, with the tank gun. I should have. And then we had to bail out because they were approaching us and firing at us. And of course, we had 11 men that piled out of those 4 tanks, and nobody had any weapons. One guy had a Tommy gun. I had a pistol. And here we were. Here these, we could see these rows of tanks on the road, and the infantrymen out into the field, and they were coming, and we were 12 miles to headquarters, and I said, to myself, what the hell do we do? And you don't want to run away. So I said, we'll stick together. There's a few of these guys that were there, had been there ahead of us. And the Germans were getting closer, and we didn't have anything to fight with, and I just said, I can't run. You just don't run away.
It was overwhelming opposition,
and
correct?
that's right. And there were some, the British had been there for a while, a couple of days ago before. In fact, I knew that area. I'd been there myself with the British. And they had a lot of foxholes. I don't know whether you ever saw a British foxhole.
No.
Well, they are square and deep. American foxholes are body length and not deep. So these British foxholes were there. And of course, by this time they were muddy, and we had no choice either to have to run away or to dive into those British foxholes.
Was there mud or water in those foxholes?
Well, it was muddy, and of course it was. And I don't like to talk about this. I had took out my pistol, and I tried to stand up, and there was no way I could have gotten out of that darn thing. You know, if the Germans got by, to make a combat out of it, in a muddy foxhole with a pistol. And nobody else, the other bunch of the guys got in the foxholes too. And so there came a time I said, I can't get out of here. I said, if I did get out of it, I'd last 30 seconds while I was clambering out of it. So I put the gun back in the holster. And pretty soon a German, only a couple of minutes ago, a German soldier came up. And just a private soldier, and he had the rifle or pistol, and he glanced at me, and he saw that my hands were empty. In other words, I did not have a weapon. So he just mentioned for me to get up. If I had that pistol in my hand, then I'm resistance, and he would have shot me. That would have been murder.
Yeah.
So he said, get up, and of course I clambered out. The other guys had the same thing happen. We were POWs.
Mm-hmm. And that was in December of 42?
Yeah, December the 10th.
December the 10th.
Now the tragedy of that is, well, more than one. When we got down there and realized they were getting into a bottleneck, and the troops that were already there were being broken up, I tried to take contact on the tank radios with my own platoon and back to headquarters, and the radios did not work. In other words, I was trying to tell the people back at headquarters that we were running into problems down here, and I couldn't communicate with them, and I couldn't even communicate with the other tanks of the 4, because in other words, there was no, we just couldn't communicate with the radios, did not function. So when this all happened, nobody back, we were 12 miles from headquarters, and nobody back there knew about it.
So what goes through your mind when you realize that you've been captured?
Well, I can tell you that when you get into a combat situation, you start going through a mental adjustment. You're getting ready, you know, and you have 3 possibilities. You get killed, you're going to get wounded, or you're going to make it through. Nobody considered the possibility you might get captured. That just never was thought about. And all of a sudden, you're a POW and you say, my God, how did this happen? And you go through a tortuous, it's something you don't get over for a long time, a long time. So I had a German officer come up and take my picture. He was traveling, he had a camera around his neck, you know. He was with the fighting troops, and he took my picture. I often wish I'd seen that. The German soldier unhooked my pistol belt and dropped it. And I had one of my guys did get a shot in the rear end. He had a chest wound. And in those days, in fact, all the days, the officer, our officers, hid their insignia. You didn't want to advertise to the enemy that I'm a captain or I'm a lieutenant, because that's what they aimed for. So one of my guys indicated to the Germans that I was an officer, and of course they took me. They took me right out, and I was by myself and the other guys.
Why did he do that?
Because German army is very militaristic. Officers run everything.
So you were going to get better treatment or worse treatment because you were singled
I
out?
was going to be different.
Different, okay. Yeah.
Probably better, but not necessarily, but different. When you're an officer, you're not an enlisted man, or you're not a runner. You're an officer. Mm-hmm. That's a big deal in any army, particularly in the German army.
Right. All right. So
now there's one other part of this
Sure.
that I should tell you. One of the tank crews was my regular army guy, and he was really a senior non-com. And when I said we got to bail out of these tanks and stick together, he decided otherwise, and he and his two-man crew they took off and ran. Mm-hmm. So we started with 11, and there were 8 of us, and all of a sudden we realized that this Sergeant Masden was not there anymore. They got back. I don't know how they did it. They had 12 miles. There was a lot of fighting between where we were and back to the headquarters. They got back, and as I understand it, they never could explain to the folks back at headquarters that they got back and the rest of the platoon did not. They had a difficulty in explaining that. I don't know what happened to them, but we started with 11 guys, and 8 of us got captured. The other 3 took off, and they ran. And I just couldn't run. I couldn't run. Yeah. Couldn't run. I should have, but I had to say, I did take 12 miles into the combat zone. How are you going to get 12 miles, 8 guys? Mm-hmm. I said, we got to stay here. There's a fight going on. I said, you have to make a quick decision. What are you going to? You're going to run or do what you can? And there's nothing you can do except jump in the foxholes. Mm-hmm. I don't like to think about that.
Yeah. So where did they take you?
Well, they took us. They took us to the small town. There had been a lot of fighting with this town, in that neighborhood, about 4 or 5 miles from there. The British and the Germans had been fighting for this for a week before, and they changed hands a couple of times. And the Germans held it. It was the next town up, and there was this was kind of behind the scenes now, because the attack had going the other way. We're now 4 miles behind the line of scrimmage, so-called, little town. And there's some German officers there. They were a fine-looking bunch of guys. They looked like the Olympic team. They were well-dressed, and they talked good English, and they welcomed us and politely, and talked to us a little bit in English. One of them, I can remember saying that in English, we were a couple of 1,000 miles away from Casablanca at that time, way across North Africa, of course. Casablanca faces on is outside the boundaries of North Africa. What's the big stone there?
Gibraltar?
Gibraltar. It was outside Gibraltar.
So it's right across.
In other words, Casablanca faced the Atlantic Ocean. It was not inside the Mediterranean. Mm-hmm. And if you take where we were, way over in Tunisia, back to there, that's a long way. Because I can remember that German officer said, he said, we'll be in Casablanca in 30 days. That was his, we just said, yeah, okay. And then they took us into the city of Tunis, about 20 miles.
Okay, so what kind of accommodations did they have for you?
Well, nothing. They put us in the French had a cavalry unit there, so they had a horse barn that had a lot of hay in it. So this was, by that time we got there, it was dark. So they just piled us into this barn, and they just said, get some sleep or just get in the barn. So we just, there was some other guys that got captured to the unit that was already at this point that were there. We didn't know who they were, and it was dark. We got to know them the next day. So they took good care of us. They just put us in some rooms and had guards around the place. Nobody was going to try to get away. There wasn't any place you could go. And so in 3 days they kept us there, and then they took us to the airport and flew us over to Italy.
Okay.
That was quite a ride too.
Tell us about the ride. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, by this time, after 3 days, they'd taken some other prisoners. There was about 95 guys. And we were in this huge airport that belonged to the city of Tunis, a big airport. And we heard a sound of a plane up in the sky, a big sound of it. And we finally found it, and we could see this big, huge, slow-moving airplane with it had 12 wheels on it, 6 sets of 2, a huge thing. And I said, my God, look at that huge thing, my God. And finally that darn thing came in and landed, and the nose of it opened up like this, and out stepped a whole flock of Russian or German soldiers with the full kits. In other words, it was a troop carrier. It was a freight thing. It had 6 engines on it, 6 engines, and when they were full power, man, there was a roar. I'll tell you. I said, look at that darn thing. I said, are they going to put us in that thing? And they did. And of course, it was just a metal frame with a canvas around it and wood planking in it for a floor. And they put us in that darn thing, and they taxied out. And when they did a takeoff, they turned full power on those 6 engines, and man, it just roared. And they got up into the air, and we had to make a stop. And we stopped in Sicily one night, and then we slept in some kind of a civilian house, I think, that the Germans had taken over. And then the next day we flew into Naples, and when the pilot he flew around so that we could look down into Mount Vesuvius.
I had a little tour.
Yeah, we went, and we could see Vesuvius, and he turned around. He was going to make his landing, and he overshot the field. So he had to gun that darn thing at those engines and take it. The roar was terrific. He was down pretty low because he had overshot the field. So he had to get up into the air again. We went back around Vesuvius, and this time we landed.
Close call.
It was just the Naples airport, and they took us into one of the buildings that were there. There were Italians around, and all of a sudden the Germans just appeared, and some Italian officers were there, and we didn't realize that they were turning us over to the Italians, which is what they were doing, because I think I already explained to you
Tell us about the politics of that.
Well, the politics were that Hitler and Mussolini had decided amongst themselves that anything that happened in the Mediterranean area, either on the North African side or the boot of Italy, or anything that where the shores of the Mediterranean Sea were involved, Greece or whatever, that was to be Mussolini's sphere of influence, and the rest of Europe would be Hitler's. So we got captured by the Germans, but it was in Italian territory, so-called. And so as soon as it was convenient, they turned us over to the Italians, and the Italians put us into an Italian camp. And so we went through that, and that's where Von Ryan's Express started.
Okay, let's pick up the story from your arrival in Naples, as life has now changed.
Yes, all of a sudden we were guests of the Italian government. We didn't realize that it was going to happen, but the Germans were all gone and the Italians were there, and so we figured that they were in charge. And they took us to what they call a transit camp just outside Naples, a place called Capua, C-A-P-U-A, Capua, a little transit camp. And that was to just kind of a short stay before they sent us to a permanent camp. Now, the interesting thing about Capua was, that, first of all, that there were some British guys there. Because our group was only a few Americans. There was a much bigger contingent of British troops there. From the 8th Army in the desert, that was Montgomery's outfit, they'd been at... in Egypt and so on. They're fighting their way across, and of course they had lost some people, casualties, including POWs, and we were beginning to see a lot of British Empire people. But the interesting thing I want you to know about what happened in the Italian camp, the Vatican from Rome regularly had one of their representatives visit that Capua camp all the time, taking names and addresses of British and American POWs, new POWs, and through Catholic Church channels all around the world would send that information back through to your hometown, and they would contact your family and your wife or your mother and say, "This is we've contacted him. He's at such and such a place. He's in good health," and so on. The Catholic Church did that on the side, and they made the contact at Capua because that was when the place we stopped first, and that was a great thing. And I've got the letter that my mother got from the local Catholic diocese that the Catholic Church had found me and that I was in good health.
So initially, your mother was notified you were missing?
Well, I've got that. If you have time enough, I could show you the telegram.
And so for about how long before you were missing did she know that you were in
About
prison?
a month.
About a month.
She had to live with it for a month. I was missing in action.
Yeah, okay.
But that was an interesting thing. The Italians, through the Vatican, provided that service. And the Italians then took us to, by train, to a permanent camp at a place called Chieti, C-H-I-E-T-A, Chieti. And that was the permanent camp, and that was filled with all these British guys that had been captured in North Africa. And I was starting to get filled up with us Americans. And what happened to us there is in that journal that I'm pointing with my fingers. I'm going to give that to you. I wrote that journal of my career, so-called, in Chieti with the British, in my early days with the Italians, in an Italian POW camp, what it was like. And I'm going to give you that if you want it, because it's very much in detail. It's not a diary; it's a journal. And I wrote it in a little pamphlet paper pamphlet I had bought, and I put it away when I kept it with me all during the war, all the troubles we had, and bombs and boxcars and everything. I never lost that notebook. And I got home and filed it away in my belongings, and for 70 years. Then I had occasion to dig it out a couple of years ago with another story background. And the young lady that's dug it out, her name is on this thing, she transcribed it. She took that notebook and put it on the typewriter, and she came up with 19 pages of a typewritten story of a composite of my, and I read that thing after 70 years, and I said, who the hell wrote this? Literally. Because I'd never seen it all really like done and put in one place. Yeah. I said, I wrote it, and it's not edited. It's just exactly like I wrote it.
The way it came out of your mind.
At that point in time. Now, if you guys want that, you wouldn't believe it today. It's sitting there.
Well, do you want to refer? Why don't you?
Well, I don't think
refer to anything, or,
no,
or we've been talking about it as we go.
Well, really, what it does is just tells you what life was like in an Italian POW camp.
All right, let's talk about that now. Let's talk about your recollections of that. The food, the accommodations, how the Italians treated you.
I'd almost rather have you guys read this and digest it yourself. Yeah, well, the first of all the things you need to know is that the weather in Italy is a lot better than we ever had later on in Poland and Germany. Mm-hmm. You don't know that at the time, but the weather in Italy is nice. Mm-hmm. The Italians, we had not really experienced the German POW program because we had just been captured with them and come through channels, and we hadn't really been to a German POW camp yet. But we now were in an Italian camp, and their attitude towards the war was a lot softer, gentler, less involved. Didn't care for the war. Didn't like the Germans. And they had a lot of relatives in the States, and they were perfectly willing to share what they had. Much better. Food was much better. They had that kind of a climate. They had vegetables, and they shared them with us. They even had white bread. They had a PX, which the Geneva Convention for Prisoners of War says all POW countries have to have a PX. In other words, to make things available to their prisoners, for shaving cream and candy and toothbrushes and that sort of thing. And the Italians did that, and they had ersatz candies and they paid us in POW money, so it was money that couldn't be used out in society, but it could be used in the PX, which the German Italian army ran. Mm-hmm. So life there was pretty good. We had not yet experienced the German life, but we could tell that the Italians were pretty good.
What was typical meal that they would serve you? What did they?
Oh, I wish I could. Well, they had of course they had white bread. They would have a lot of soups and macaroni with vegetables in it. Sometimes a little bit of meat, peas and carrots, and so the food. Well, I've already said some pieces of meat. I'm stuttering now, trying to find the words to put it into. But it was pretty good. There was some fruit too.
Yeah.
Fruit. I'm trying to think whether they had any Italian beer or not. They might have, if they had some beer. I never drank beer, but I think they might have had some available. But the food was much better. The thing about that camp was the British were there, and they were from all over the British Empire, and they had a program for everybody and everything of any kind organized in the daily life of a POW. All kinds of law clubs and drama clubs, and they were putting on shows. You wouldn't believe the dramas they would put on, the skits, and they had a band that started, which I got involved with, and thank God I used to be a trombone player, and so I got in that band with the British guys. There's a doggone good British musicians, wow, and they put on these great shows, and how they had the scripts through the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, And they put on these regular shows, and they had intelligence groups that analyzed all the radio news on Rome radio and letters from home. And they had a full program of activities that whatever you wanted to do or whatever your interests were, there was a facility for it. And they stopped the thing every day at 4 o'clock for tea. And they invited us Americans. We were just a handful of Americans. They couldn't welcome us anymore. Come on over for tea. And they always had some little goodies for you, from jam, from the Red Cross parcels, and little crackers and things, and a little cup of tea. And they made you welcome. And it was a pretty good life.
How long were you actually there at that camp?
Well, I was there from, say, that would be January. Well, actually, that was my first Christmas. I was a POW for 3 Christmases. And my capture was the 10th of December, so that was 2 weeks. So I got to this camp in, it would have been in early January 1943. Mm-hmm. And I was there until then you have to go through this story about Von Ryan's Express. That would be about in September. September, October for 43 was when the next phase starts in this. But life in the POW camp in Italy was maybe let me give it to you this way to try to summarize it. In this journal, you're going to read 2 words if you do it. It's called green grass. Remember green grass.
Okay.
There came a time when the Italians made a deal with us, and we made a deal with it, so that some of us could go out. This is Katie was in a small mountain town up in eastern, near the Adriatic Sea, halfway up the Budas. Small German or Italian mountain village with small homes and poor families, and not the elite, and just the lower class Italians. That we would have a walk outside the walls of this camp, which was really against all procedures, because we had to sign a form that we would not escape. And of course, that's rule number 1. Is every POW is under rules of her own. You got to escape if you can. Mm-hmm. And we signed that away. Mm-hmm. So we only did that one walk. But anyway, when I came back I went on that walk, and that was when I wrote one of the entrances, the things about this journal here. Mm-hmm. Because in a POW camp, you have walls, you have dirt, you have a path that walks around the thing, you have an area between that path and that wall with barbed wire, in which you step into, you're in big trouble, because they got guard towers there with guys with guns in them. Mm-hmm. And if your ball went in that area, you had to get approval of the guard. You say, "We've got the ball that lets you do that." Other than that, they were destined to just they have to be prepared. So that's the way you live. No, there's dirt, there's barbed wire, there's walking paths and walls and gun towers. There ain't no green grass. So I wrote in my journal here, and I didn't realize this until 70 years later, that I had written down how good it was to get out of the camp and see that green grass. And that tells you a lot.
So they let you walk outside?
That one day.
Just one day?
They would have let us do it, but the senior, this is a British camp. These were all under, this camp was under control of the British Army, the POWs, and we Americans were guests. And they said, we're not going to sign away our right to escape. So we did it that once. But the words green grass tell you a lot, and I just explained it to you. Yeah. It says a lot to you about the state of mind, because when you're a POW, a lot of people have said to us then and now and whoever, well, you're not getting shot at, and you're not getting wounded, and you ought to be lucky, and you're fortunate to be a POW, and thank God that you are one because you aren't getting shot at. And we'd say, wait a minute. When you're a POW, your loss of liberty is the worst thing that you can lose. Because 24 hours a day, every day, you live at the discretion and the pleasure of the enemy. And you have no idea when you get up the morning whether this is going to be your last day because some nut in the German army or the Italian army says, we're not going to feed these guys anymore. The hell with them. We're going to get them out and shoot them. We didn't know whether they would or not, but that's the way you live. Mm-hmm. And you live with no green grass, and you make the best of it with your clubs and societies and shows, but every day is at the discretion of the enemy. And that's a way of life that can eat you alive. Mm-hmm. And I say that in a lot of different ways in that book. I'm doing the best I can now to convey it to you.
People in this country take that for granted because we've always had it.
Yeah. Now, compared to what the Japanese were doing to the American prisoners, is two different story, and I just back off on that because we had a country club compared with those guys. Mm-hmm. But what I've just told you about our way of life is pretty tough too, because you live at the mercy of the Germans and the Italians. And that can eat you alive, and I mentioned that in my journal here. So that I can't add to that in terms of, all I can do is, as I've already said, is that the British were great hosts. They had all these clubs and societies and discussions and walking, and they made it comfortable. They had teas, and within the context of the fact that you're still a POW, you still got walls that made it livable, and they were a jolly good group. They had a pretty good bunch of musicians and show people. I got involved with that. Thank God I did there. And when I was in Poland and Germany, I had a little bit of ability singing and playing an instrument. Thank God, just enough to participate. And I did it. I jumped at it, and I had a ball playing with these guys and singing with them, and it was just made life livable.
Well, you've done a good job explaining the loss of liberty as best as it can be explained.
That's
it's almost,
correct.
You've tried to explain the unexplainable.
Yes, and I did it in terms of green grass.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting metaphor.
Yeah.
It's a nice graphic.
Yeah.
We all walk on our green grass and take it for granted, but
yeah,
there was none there.
There is no green grass in the POW camp. Yeah. There's walls, and there's barbed wire, and there's dirt. There ain't no green grass. And I wrote that down, and I didn't realize what I was saying when I wrote that down in 1943. Until I read it myself, I said, green grass, who cares? I must have really felt that. Yeah. I wrote it, put green grass. The interesting thing. So that was the way we existed in India. If you want that journal and you have time to interest to look at it, you get all the detailed answers to what you and I are talking about. But I can't. It'll take you 45 minutes to read that, and we haven't got that much time now, I would think. But
well, you've got plenty of time if there's anything in there that you particularly wanted to read.
All I wanted to do is give it to you if you want it, and if you don't want it, just tell me so. But
we'd absolutely like to have a copy of that.
Okay, fine. I wish you would. If you read that, you can find out about the POW life in toto, because it discusses this name, rank, and serial numbers in this thing. Yeah. The shows we did, the names of the shows, and how they put them, how they did makeup. The British and the Americans did a little bit. How they did makeup, how they learned lines, how they had sets, stages, and how they added the music in. Everybody was trying to make it as much like home.
And the Italians gave you pretty good latitude
Oh,
to do that.
they did. Well, even the Germans did, because if you're doing that sort of thing, you're not digging tunnels. See, now the British were digging tunnels. I did help on one of those tunnels. Maybe I should tell you about this.
Sure.
Because it's only a sidelight, but it did happen. The biggest problem with the tunnel was starting it at the shortest point to get through to the tunnel and get outside the wall. Where can you start so you don't have to dig forever? And then what do you do with all the dirt? That was a big problem.
Yeah.
Excuse me, a big problem. And the British had an idea. There was one place where they did a lot of sunning in it, and where they hung out their laundry. And it was reasonably close to the walking path and then the wall. So they figured but they had to start out in the open to start the thing, to get going. So they approached me and said, could you get us 30 Americans to one a day to come for an hour and give us a talk about their subject, their hobby, their job in society, just something, and we'll furnish, we'll do it make sure that all the laundry is being hung out to dry, and we'll have a bunch of our guys standing around listening to you, and right at their feet they're going to start digging. And the laundry and the guys standing around, of course the Italians had soldiers walking around, just guards.
So how far away were the soldiers?
Well, 15 or 20 feet.
So right in broad daylight.
Broad daylight. But they were going to hide it with the guys standing around, screening it, with having as much laundry out there as possible. And they set this up where they staged it without anybody doing it, just to make sure that it would work, because these Italians, they aren't all scientists and so on. They're just GIs just walking by with a rifle slung, and they just walk by and they'd see these guys standing there and they just keep on walking, So I furnished them speakers, and they just started to dig here, and they had ways of getting rid of the dirt, in a lot of ways which I can't even tell you about, because they don't even know how but they got rid of the dirt, and we did the 30 days, and they figured that they could have a big enough hole, and they could put a top on it, and that they then could just put a top on it and pick out the top and drop somebody down in the hole to continue digging and put the top back on. They didn't need my screening anymore. So I furnished the 30 switch.
The human shield.
Human shield. I don't know whether there were several other tunnels that were started. One was in the cookhouse, which was another separate building, an old dilapidated stone structure. There was one tunnel that I'm not sure, it might have been the one that I helped start, because at the time when which is the next story, is when Italy went out of the war, all the soldiers and the guards went home. They just said, leave it there, and they left, and it was weird. And we were there for 3 weeks without anybody there, nobody there. And that was a wonderful, a terrible time. That was the time then these guys who were digging, maybe it was that tunnel or one of the other tunnels, they said, we're going to finish that son of a bitch if it kills us. They went outside the camp and dug back the other way, and they said, we'll finish that.
The British, boy, when they start something.
I wasn't there when that happened, or I didn't see it. I was just told that they finished it. We were just talking about when the Italians
when the
quit.
Italians took off. Yeah.
There's so much in terms of day-by-day life that amazed me was the shows. I refer to that. These guys and the British and the Americans, when we got to Poland, did the same thing. That they could make a set out of cardboard of food packet or a piece of lumber, or they could make makeup, and they could make guys look like girls. You'd be amazed. I could show you some of that. And they could put on these shows, and they would stage them just like it was at home. And the British did it, and we did it in Poland too. And it was just amazing what they did. And then they had all these guys too that were experts on public affairs and GI stuff. And they used to hold meetings every once in a while. This is the news of the day from outside in the war news, and not as we see it, not what Rome radio says it is, or German radio. Things were going on all the time, with these guys. And we had in Italy, we had, gosh, we had to get going on these guys. We had a Pulitzer Prize winning news guy. Pulitzer Prize winner, worked for Associated Press. His name was Larry Allen. And you could look him up in your almanac. You could go to the store today and buy an almanac. It's got all the Pulitzer Prize winners all the way back. And by 1942, you'll find one on international reporting, Lawrence Allen. Well, Larry was one of our roommates, a civilian. And he had been assigned by the Associated Press to the British fleet, which was functioning in the Mediterranean Sea. And he wrote articles that were very uncomplimentary to the Italian Navy. Italian Navy wasn't very good. And he wrote articles that indicated that. So the Italians finally sunk the British naval ship that he was on, and they captured Larry Allen. And of course they found out that this was this SOB that was writing up that they would not let him go. And they didn't have any right to hold him because he was a civilian. But they said, we've got you now, and we're going to keep you.
No more stories.
No more stories. Well, he was one of our roommates, and he was a great guy to talk to. He was a bachelor and knew Europe, and he knew where all the bad, nasty girls lived, and where everything happened. And I used to talk to him about Cassie. And he said, I'll send you $100 wedding present when you guys get this over and you get married. He said, he never did. But I've got some letters from him that he wrote to me after the war. Great guy. He finally got, the Germans finally, he never did escape or leave the Italians. He never could get away. He ended up out in Poland with us, and the Germans finally repatriated, sent him home. But that wasn't until 1944. He stayed with us. But he started a news service in Italy and in Germany, in Poland. He wrote a front page, and he got some paper someplace, and he would make it pretend it was page one of the news, New York Times or something, and then he posted it on the bulletin board. Everybody could read it.
So how'd you get from Italy? Tell us about the transition from Italy.
Well, okay, I'll tell you about that. First of all, all of a sudden in September of ¡43, Italy went out of the war. They captured Mussolini, strung out by his heels, with his girlfriend, and they just quit the war, and all the guards, all the Italian guards went home. They didn't wait to get discharged. They said they just left. By this time there was maybe 1,000, 1,500 guys. Maybe we had a couple of hundred Americans by that time, and we were just sitting there.
Who was feeding you and taking care of you?
Well, the food was coming in. I don't know how it was getting there. And we had Red Cross parcels, and we managed to eat. But this was a walled camp, which you already referred to it. And I don't know whether you want this story. Well, yes, you have to. You have to hear this story because it's part of the big picture. At that point in time, militarily, the Americans and the British had taken this in the summer of '43. They captured Sicily, And then they moved across the toe from Sicily to the toe of Italy, way down at the bottom of the peninsula, way down where the toe is. And the first city up the lake there is Naples. That's all the Americans and the British had after Sicily was that part of Italy. Now, when the Italians all went home, the German army realized that their ally was out of the war, so they sent troops down through the Brenner Pass to northern Italy, and they just flooded troops coming down to defend Italy, from the Americans and the British, which at that point in time was just the toe of Italy. Do you get the picture that I'm trying to?
Yeah.
So, in so doing, the road ran right past our POW camp.
And you're in Capua still?
Well, no, we're in Chieti.
Oh, Chieti, okay.
We're halfway up we're on the Adriatic side. We're halfway up, we're across the mountains from Rome. About halfway up. So the German army is flooding down through all the roads and heading towards the way down to southern Italy. They're going right past our walled camp. One day, some of the Germans stopped there and said, "My God, this is 1,500 American and British officers here." Just said that. We were having an awful time keeping the guys inside. These guys wanted to bust out and flood the countryside try to live. And we used to take shoes away from people. You can't. You got to stay here. You got to stay here. You can't go. It's crazy to try to all 15 other guys to live on the mountainside. So they took over the camp, and they took over the camp, and there were 5 barracks in the camp, 5 groups of BOWs, and every time came time that they were going to move us. The Germans were going to move us, so they did it one group at a time. I think I was in group number 2, number 3. But they formed us up, and they marched the first group out the gate, and there was a road past it, and they marched out the gate, and it was quiet, and then all of a sudden we heard a long burst of machine gun fire. Oh, I said, "Oh my God, were they shooting these guys?" We didn't know. And the second group went out, and the same thing happened. The third group, I think, was the one I did. And I said, "Well, let's see." So we went out the main gate, and they had a flock of German trucks lined up to pick up these guys, including us. And they're opening the trucks on the back, and so they filled up our truck that we were in. And down the road comes a couple of German soldiers carrying a machine gun on a tripod. And they set it up in the ditch right down there and aimed it, fed a band of machine gun bullets in it, and fired it into the dirt. Psychological warfare. And then they laughed. That's what they were doing. They weren't shooting anybody. They were just scaring the living bejesus out of us.
Yeah. And I guess it worked.
Yeah, it worked. So they took us to a nearby town called Sulmona, Sulmona, Sulmona. And Sulmona was on a railroad. It was a railhead. And that's where Von Ryan's Express started.
Tell us a little bit about Von Ryan's Express.
Well, Von Ryan's Express, David Westheimer, the author was David Westheimer. He was a writer. He was one of the roommates. I've got his original book here. We stayed in touch with David up until he died. And he wrote that story after the war. It was a big-time seller. He sold it to the movies. And that movie starts with the Italian government pulling out of the war and all the Italian guards going home, and the German taking over and taking us to Sulmona and forming this train. That's where the movie starts. Now, Von Ryan was a composite character. So that Frank Sinatra never sings a song in this picture. He was an American aviator, and he kind of assumed the leadership role of Americans and the British. They had to have somebody leading it. There wasn't anybody that they singled out of the actual people that were there. They just made a compact character out of Sinatra. And he was the leader of the POWs. And they packed them into the trains. And of course, Waful was one of them. And we started out north through Rome and headed towards the Brenner Pass, and we were going to go through to into Austria and then out to Poland. But anyway, that part of it, that Westheimer's Von Rein's Express, that part of it's factually so. Where he branches off into in his imagination, what won him the Pulitzer Prize, which he did, was he has the POWs hijack that train from the German guards. And how he does that in the movie and in his story is fascinating. And then they take the train to Switzerland, which was neutral, and freedom. That's Von Rein's Express.
I see.
Now, that train did exist, and I was on it. What the hijacking and going to Switzerland, that did not happen.
That was just in the movies.
That was just in the movies.
But that was the inspiration for the movie.
That was inspiration for the movie. And the funny part of it, there's a lot of fun. Two things that are funny about it. One is that David sold the rights to that film for $75,000, and he missed out on all those residuals. It was shown hundreds of times. You saw it, thousands of people saw it. Every time it was a fee. He said he never got a nickel on that. He said, well, 75 grand was a lot of money in 1965. He said, I don't. And so that he doesn't. That didn't bother him a bit. I forgot what the other story was. Anyway, we got up through the Brenner Pass. We did go through an air raid up in northern Italy, but that was a scary thing. But you get used to those scares.
That was an air raid probably from the U.S. bombers?
Yeah, the city of Bolzano is the southern terminus of the Brenner Pass. It's a pretty big city in northern Italy. You can see it on all the maps. It's in very mountainous character, and they had there was a big mountain stream that ran through that way, and there was a railroad, and the railroad bridged this river. It was right at the edge of the airport with the train station, and the Americans were aiming for that bridge. You know, that would
cut them out of the pass.
Cut them out of the country, and so they couldn't use it to send stuff. Of course, they didn't know that train that was going across that bridge was us. So they were bombing that bridge at the same time we were crossing it. So we got through into the station, and everybody was busting out of the cars and scattering through the town. I don't think we ever lost anybody. I don't think it hit any cars, but it was an exciting air raid. We were right in the middle of it. But we escaped that and started off the next morning, and we ended up up in Poland.
So now you're in the custody of the Germans.
Yeah,
bringing you to Poland.
That's correct. We're now in Poland. We're in a POW camp in Poland. That camp in Poland, which was Oflag 64, OFLAG. Oflag 64 is a combination of two words. OF is partly Oflag, which is camp, or officer rather. OF is officer. And lager is camp, so it's officers' camp. It cuts down to Oflag. And that turned out to be the only German POW camp for ground officers, either from Italy, North Africa, Normandy, Battle of France. We were all of the ground officers. Now, the Air Force guys, the guys that got shot down, those Air Force camps that they had for people, there's worth thousands of them. But on ground officers, it only at the tail end, there were somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 other Poland. That was all that's all of us from the ground, the infantry, tanks, and so on. Air Force guys in the camps were by thousands. Because those, BEVs, a B-24 or B-17 crew, and you probably know this now, those crews were 11 men. Now a heavy bomber is 2 guys, 3 maybe. It was 11 in those days. So there were a shot goes down, 11 guys go down. A lot of them parachuted out, and they became POWs. They filled up the camps in a hurry.
Yeah.
But us, there was only 15, 1800. So we went out to that camp in Poland. And we started a new life out there. A lot different.
So, okay, tell us about the conditions in that place.
Well, of course, the weather was terrible out there.
Now, what time of year again? Is this
Well, we got there in
fall?
October. We got there in October 1943.
Okay, so the weather's starting to get
Yeah,
cold.
it started to get cold, and they just barely heated the place. The food was terrible. They didn't have a PX. They didn't furnish anything that you could buy, like toothpaste and candy, that sort of like the Italians did. They didn't even have a PX. They were supposed to, but they didn't. They had terrible bread, which I'm paying the price for today. The bread was black bread. It was 20% sawdust, literally. I have the official menu for that. For the recipe, I have it in my record. This is the official German. 20% sawdust, and about 10% crumpled up tree leaves. You can smoke tree leaves, they crinkle up and they dry. Well, they would just build that into the bread, along with the sawdust. And then bruised rye flour, which nobody knows what that is. I've asked a lot of chefs over the years, what is bruised rye flour? And nobody ever. So it was heavy, sour, black, and you just hated it. But you had to eat it because it was the only way you could get some food on your stomach. They had rotten potatoes, no vegetables, no fruits. You lived on one Red Cross parcel rather than you got Red Cross parcels when they deigned to deliver to the Army and the Red Cross got the parcels there. The Germans would say, issue them when they damn felt like it. They used to piss us off. We knew we had them. They just said, so when we got them, we ate pretty good. When we didn't get them, we lost a lot. That's where I lost 35 pounds. But we went to work on there. When we got out there in the fall of 1943, there was only just maybe a couple of hundred guys there. That isn't much to start a theater program or a band or any program, but we started building it, and I got involved with that again like I did with the British. And I've got some pictures there I could show you guys of what we did with the orchestra. We had a pretty good orchestra, friendly. The band we had in Italy was a good band. I was thrilled to play with them. And the Americans in Poland, we did pretty well too. And we other shows, you'd be surprised what guys can do with nothing on the shows. We're taking building sets out of nothing. And I'm talking about good sets now. New York plays, 3 men and a horse, and the Petrified Forest, and the front page. We had scripts that the Red Cross sent us of these shows, and we were to take them and put them on stage. You say you can't do that. Well, we did. The British did it, and we did it. You do what you have to do. That's speech number 1. It's on here. You got a chapter heading on it. When you're a POW, you do what you have to do. If you haven't got anything, you got to get something done. You do it. That's American. And I've got some proof of that I could show you guys. We even put on black shows. We call them minstrel shows. Can't do a black show now. Everybody was blackface. We blacked ourselves, and you have couple of end men, and you got a Mr. Lockla in the middle. And these two guys are the jokesters. And then we do some singing and dancing. But that's like, you can't do that now, obviously. Yeah. We did it. I've got pictures of us all in blackface.
Were there any African Americans in the prison?
None.
No?
I never saw one. No.
All white? Yeah.
Never saw one. So we stayed there. I had 3 Christmases and 3 birthdays, you know. And well, I think a lot of interesting things about that. One of the interesting things was when we got the Red Cross parcels, we ate pretty good. If we didn't get the Red Cross parcels, it lived on the German bread and the German vegetables, which are sour cheese and sour. But you know, in December of 1944, the Germans staged a big counterattack. In fact, everybody thought that the war was over, but it wasn't. And it was kind of their last flurry. One of the things that they did was they had a lot of German soldiers who spoke English, and they dressed them up in American uniforms and dropped them behind the lines, and to change all the route directions, and so they could misdirect the American
like
troops.
The street signs, or
yeah. Now, of course, that if you got caught doing that, you're shot right now, because you're out of uniform. You can't pretend that is dead. So those guys, when you caught them, you didn't try them, you shot them. But we often wonder how about those uniforms. Well, what happened about in October and November? One day we used to get counted twice a day. You know, it didn't take very long to count them. And one day in the afternoon roll call, they kept us in formation, and they didn't say dismissed. And the German Gestapo guys, they used to come every once in a while, the civilian guys, they looked right out of the movies. And they went through all the barracks, and we went back when we finally dismissed us that day. Everybody had lost some item of clothing. I lost a pair of pants or a set of rocks. Everybody, so that's how they got all these uniforms. Yeah. And we didn't realize that until that happened in December. Say, oh, that's where the SOBs got those school uniforms. That's what they were doing that day in our camp. Yeah. We were the only camp of that size, you know, and that's where they took it. So that was a dirty trick. Now all through the days in Italy and the days in Poland, we had secret radio back to BBC. All the time.
How did you get the radios?
Well, yeah, there was two basic ways. They had ways. There were a lot of personal parcels. It's the English and the Americans, and both in Italy and in Poland, where people like me and all the people were getting personal parcels from home, and they could be clothing and cigarettes, and they get delivered. So the British and the American Army back home contacted certain POW families, and they put them involved with this thing, and they could send contraband, money, what do I say?
Radio parts?
Radio parts, then the compasses. And they had it worked out through certain number of POWs or soldiers that might get captured were trained in this thing too. So if you got captured, you could do this, and it was a big thing that kind of had to filter down to a couple of guys and a couple of families. So that we could expect that when a certain parcel came through with your name on it, it would come from your family, and they would when we got into the camp, they always had to be inspected by some of the Germans. You had to open up the parcels. Well, they always could find a way of side-slipping that darn parcel so the Germans didn't get to see it. You could do that.
Yeah.
And that was one way. The other way was you could trade with the local Germans. They would do anything for chocolate and cigarettes. Because they didn't have any candy.
So they were undermining their own.
And they didn't have any
government.
coffee, and they didn't have any cigarettes. But if they could get an American cigarette, an American something, and the guy said, yeah, you can have this package of cigarettes, but we need a radio tube. So those were the two ways. So we always, and in both camps, there was only a very handful of guys, mostly the senior officers and a couple of radio technician guys, that knew how to run this thing, and nobody knew where it was hid, because the more people that know that, the more leaks you're going to get. So, for example, out in Poland, I had no idea where that radio was, and I didn't know until after the war who the guys were that ran it, because you just don't, and the senior officers, because the Russians, the Germans knew that we had them. But they would send the Gestapo in every once in a while to find it, and they never found them. But we had news every night from BBC, for both in Italy and in Poland, on direct. Every I think it was at 1 o'clock in the morning. They would, these guys would our guys would take notes of it, and then they'd write off copies of it, and every barracks had a representative that went and picked up the notes. And then back at the barracks, you blocked all the doors and the windows with the guys, so the Germans wouldn't hear. And they would read the news to us. So we had BBC news every day.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Yep, but we didn't find out how it worked until after the war. We had reunions, and we didn't need to know where that radio was.
Yeah.
Because then we can't tell anybody.
So you still don't know where it was, or did
No,
they?
I still don't know. If I ever knew, I've forgotten where it was. I forgot. I didn't need to know it. Now, one of the interesting sidelights to this, these sidelights keep coming back.
That's good. The sidelights with the details.
Well, this is another interesting one. I had already mentioned that when we had a couple of guys that ran the parcel store. These parcels came in. They came into a certain place in the camp, and we had 2 or 3 or 4 of our guys who ran the parcel store. And there were a couple of German soldiers that were assigned to that thing too. Now they got a hold of one young German guy, the German soldier. His name was Gottfried Dietz. Gottfried Dietz. He was a kid, and they soft talked him, and he would cooperate, and you could always get the parcels through without Gottfried Dietz being involved. After the war, those guys, our guys that ran the parcel store, kept in touch with Gottfried Dietz and brought him over to the States and sent him to Princeton University.
Oh, they gave him a scholarship.
Yep,
Huh?
and he stayed in the States and taught at Princeton. And I met him at one of our reunions, and he could speak English except with a German accent. And I got introduced to him, and he said, in broken English, he said, "I was on the other side."
I guess it worked out for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was on the other side. And then we both laughed. This is years later.
Yeah.
I met Gottfried Dietz for the first time. That's a great story.
I guess so. He became a professor and all.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't forget the guys that helped him, did they?
Yeah, he didn't. And then there came a time when the Russians we're getting closer and closer and closer to Poland and us. We're right in the path of that the Russian army. Of course, the Germans were getting a kick out of them, you know. In the West with the Americans and the British after the invasion, and the Russians by the millions and guns, and they were just swarming all over the German army. They were just getting crushed. And they were just down the road a little piece, literally, maybe about one day. And we wondered then, what are the Germans going to do with us now? Here we were, 15 to 1,800, and we were all the ground officers that the Germans had. All the Air Forces, I already explained that to you. We were all of them. This is the time they're going to shoot us. It's in the winter, you know, in January 45. What are they going to do to us? So they announced that we were going to leave the next day and we were going to walk. Well, the point is, they walked us, they didn't shoot us. And we walked, and it was cold and barns, and it was rough. And the Russians were right behind us. I remember one day we marched a little extra because the Germans wanted to blow a bridge right behind us. So we had to cross that bridge, and now they blew it up, so the Russians couldn't use it. And we laid in barns, and so I lasted 6 days, and I got shin splints. I couldn't walk anymore. And they packed 95 of us into a boxcar. And we had 8 days and 9 nights in a boxcar like this, you know, and no food or nothing. And we managed to survive that, but we did.
Was the boxcar stationary? Or
no,
was it
we
going
were
somewhere?
to the train. Oh, good Lord. It was the train. And we kept wondering, we were on that thing 8 days, and we said, where the hell is the Russian Air Force? Why isn't that, are we not getting strafed every day by the Russian? We're only a day ahead. The Russians have got to have an Air Force, and they see a train. Why aren't they blitzing us? Nobody ever, I don't know why I'm here. They didn't. They should have. They could have killed us. And they sent us to a camp not far, about 20 miles from Berlin. Now we got involved with the biggest raid of the war on Berlin. I've had this debated. If it wasn't the biggest raid, it was the second biggest.
So you were in a camp in Berlin now, or
Well, no,
prison?
we were on our way to the camp. We got into Berlin. They parked us in an edge of a huge railroad yard. Berlin had a huge railroad yard. Had a big airport too, but it had a railroad yard. And we were off in one corner of the railroad yard. And you know, the American Air Force bombed targets. The British, remembering the way the Germans blitzed Berlin, or blitzed London, you know, just blanketed it, said they did the British did the same thing to Berlin, just bombed Berlin.
Just everything.
Everything. This was at midday on February the 4th, 1945. In the middle of the morning, we were that boxcar was parked in the corner of the railroad yard in Berlin. And we could hear those bombers coming. And they had, over a period of about an hour and a half, they had 3 different flights of 500 each. And they could throw out this stuff that they're supposed to deflect anti-aircraft stuff. I can't tell you what it is, but you could see it, the glistening and the thunder glistening. That was supposed to deflect and or defend against the anti-aircraft guns. We could see that happening. And then actually, the Americans, they were bombing up in a couple of miles away from us at the other end of the airport in downtown Berlin. So we could see where the place was jumping like this, but we weren't the target, or I wouldn't be here. So that was quite an experience to live through that. Because when the 500 were done, we said, well, that's it. And then another 500 came, and then another 500 came.
So you've had 2 or 3 instances where you know, with a machine gun and now this, where you might have thought you were probably going to die. What's going through your mind when that happens? Did you pray? How did it affect your faith?
Well, I had I had a lot of faith. The I my faith started, and this is anyway. I'm debating how to give you the answer to this because there is an answer. My faith started when I was 7 years old, when my dad died of a heart attack. He was 35. My mother was just one of 11 Canadian girls, came over to the States to find a new life for herself, and got a job as a house nanny, and met my father, married him. And when my dad died, my mother took me aside and said, "Don," she said, "I promise you that someday you'll see your daddy again." I got his picture right over there. I'm looking at it right now. Now I've lived with that promise from my mother since I was 7 years old. It's been ups and downs and ins and outs and on again and off again, but it's never left me. Up until even today, it's not leaving me today. Because, and I went to church a lot, and another guy and I started a little church in our POW camp. I didn't tell you about that. And then, so church and faith and hope and, well, it's faith and hope, because nobody's ever been up there and found that it ain't so, and come back and told us, does it? We're taught that there is a hereafter, and that we're going to be together again, and we hope that's true. Our faith says that it is, but nobody's proved that it ain't so, and it's only faith and hope that says that it is so. So I've lived with my mom's faith, my Cassie Waful, my little Italian wife, was a great believer, and so I just said, if it's my time, then we'll find out whether Mom was right or not. That's the answer to your question.
So you had a calmness about you at the time, do you think?
Yes, even when I got captured. I
Were
could think
were the other guys with you reacting? I assume,
no,
differently?
they were very quiet about it. So was I. I just it just didn't. It was something that I guess that I could accept because I'd lived with the fact that I might see my daddy again someday, and I said maybe this is it. And I didn't spend any time thinking about that, but it was just part of who I am, or who I was. I lived with that all my life.
So when you lost your daddy at 7, that was quite a blow for you, I'm sure.
Oh, sure it was.
Yeah.
My mother married again. He was a wonderful guy, just a great guy. I was 11, but he wasn't my dad.
Yeah, there's just a little something different. Yeah.
So in other words, that promise was for my dad. And so I believe it. They believe that I'm going to see my 2 lovely wives, that beautiful Cassie, and I went back and I married my college sweetheart. That's Jenny. That's the other gal, and her picture's next to Megan Kelly's. That's wife number 2. Okay. I married her when I was 84. She was 82. And she was a Christian, and Cassie was a stalwart Christian. Cassie did not like the idea of denominations. She didn't like to be called a Catholic or a Presbyterian or a Baptist. She says, "I'm a Christian."
What church did you go to?
I still belong to the Reformed Church in America, which were the Dutch Presbyterians, over on Teal Avenue. And in fact, it took her 12 years to join that church. She taught Sunday school in my church for 23 years, never joined it for 12 years. Finally, she said, I better join. And she did. The thought that I'm going to see them together someday is just a thrill to me. if it was going to happen by the Russians or the Germans or the air raids or something, I went through my childhood days and my high school days, my college days, my army days, my business days, the loss of my boss and new businesses and ups and downs and ins and outs and running a baseball team, big things, bad things, that trickle of line of faith and hope never left. And that's what I tell people today. If they ask me, what did I get out of the war? You know, could I give any advice and counsel? I say, everybody, in my opinion, needs some kind of a spiritual dimension in their life. It can take all kinds of forms: membership, Bible study, some kind of. You can't get it on Sunday morning on the 14th tee at Drummonds. You have to belong to some kind of a role model organization or a person to help you keep it alive, because you have doubts. I've had acres and acres and years of doubts about this, and all of a sudden it always comes back, because somebody, another soldier that I meet, another preacher that I hear, he comes back and he says, yeah, it reminds me of what my dad said, my mom said. In other words, it has its ups and downs. Yeah. It is its ins and outs, but somebody needs to have that. You have 6 days of the world being a pain in the butt. You ought to have one day that's got different thoughts and different ideals of a hereafter and goodness and love and belonging and being together. And they call it church, and they call it heaven, and they call it promises that you see your family again. And that's a pretty good idea. Yeah. So I've lived with it now for 90 years. And I suggest everybody should have it in their own version. That's why I say some kind of a spiritual dimension. I'm not going to have an altar call or try to sign you up to come to my church. You need to find your own way of recognizing that there must be some. Did you ever know about Joel Marinas locally?
Yes. He was on the news, wasn't
Yes,
he?
yeah. Joel Marinas was a Jew. Mm-hmm. And I knew him for the Chiefs. And he was a Jew, and he was doggone good at what he did. But he was not a nice Jew. But then he got in some kind of a discussion with his family, and his daughters, his alleged to have said, Daddy, you need to read the Bible. So Joel Marinas read the scriptures and converted to Christianity and became a member of one of the Bible churches.
Which church did he go to, you remember?
Well, it's an Abundant Life out here, I think. I'm not sure. The same place that Jim Boeheim and his wife go to now. Mm-hmm. I don't. And he became talk about a born-again guy. It made a new world out. He never lost his professional skills when he was going through all that. He was still a top reporter and broadcaster, but he was a different person as anybody. And I heard him give this talk twice of how it happened. Twice I heard him make that talk. Yeah. Marvelous talk. My gosh.
Is he still around?
No, he just died this past year. Oh. So that's going back to the year. I never panicked because of course you get into a state of mind. You're going to a combat zone. And you live with it every day. So it might happen. It's never very far away from you. So when it comes close, you don't panic. You just you're ready for it, and maybe it's now, and then maybe that's the time is when I'm going to find out whether my mom was right. It all kind of combines to give you some peace of mind. Mm-hmm. I was not a hero. I couldn't run. That was my patriotic flag waving thing. I just could not run away. Mm-hmm. I couldn't. But it might have been the thing to do, but I said, on a realistic thing, I was 12 miles away with 8 or 9 guys, and the war was going on around me and between me and behind me. But I just couldn't run away.
What was your initial reason to decide to make yourself available to protect your country? I mean, what was Why did you do
Oh,
it?
that was a very realistic thing, that I knew that we were going to get in the war, that it was inevitable, that we had to do it, that we were going to get, like in World War I knew historically, and I knew that at that point in that time, 1940 and 41, the Germans had raised hell with France. France was, Paris was now German, and the British were hanging on at Dunkirk, and they were getting blitzed on it. I said, we're going to get in this damn war. There's no question about it. So this is another guy and I. I said, and now the Uncle Sam's going to draft us. As long as we're going to get into it, let's get into it and things that make it better for us. And that was the selfish part. The point was that we were not trying to avoid it. It's just that we were going to go in, let's go in the best way.
Sure.
So we gambled. We took a 4-year enlistment, it was peacetime, against a 1-year draft. And we were right.
Yeah.
6 months later was Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. So we're in the winter of 45, and you're in Berlin.
Yeah.
So let's keep walking forward.
Well,
we're getting close
okay.
to the end of the war now.
Yeah, we are.
in Europe, anyway.
We're in this huge camp about 25 miles west of Berlin.
You remember the name?
Luckenwald. It's not Buchenwald, which is one of the horror camps. It's Luckenwald with an L.
Okay.
L-U-C-K-E-N, Walde. And the thing about Luckenwald was that it was in the center of Germany. And all the camps that they had in West were being chased back because the Americans and the British were closing in, so the Germans were moving those camps towards the center of Germany. And the Polish camp, and the Irish and some others, where the Russians were coming, we were moving west. Germany was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and this big, and Luckenwald was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There was 30 or 35,000 POWs from every camp in Germany were piling into there. And that was the bottom of the world. This is where we had the air raid in Berlin, and I was enclosed. I'd been in a boxcar for 8 days, and I hadn't shaved or brushed my teeth or eaten anything for 2 weeks, and I looked like a bum, and I was my clothes were shot, and I was just existing from one day to the next. And there was little or no food in Luckenwald. The Germans couldn't handle it. And we just got a few potatoes every day, and the Red Cross parcels disappeared, and boy, those last 3 months of the war were the bottom.
So there's a lot of prisoners there. Were they able to adequately care for you?
No, they couldn't. We just existed.
So you're in the boxcar, and was it January?
In January, I was 8 days and 9 nights. And
Okay,
we got there. That raid in Berlin was on February the 4th, and the next day or two is when we actually got into Luckenwald. So I was in most of February, March, and April the 21st. The Germans left.
So tell us about the conditions there.
Terrible. There was lousy barracks. No heat. Just a triple-decker barracks. All I did was take my shoes off and maybe my pants to go to sleep. Precious little food. You'd get sometimes you get a little porridge in the mornings, and you get 2 or 3 potatoes and some bread. You got bread, thank God. That sour bread.
You said that bread, you're paying the price to this day. What were there health?
Yeah, health thing.
What happened?
That bread was so sour and so leaf that the Army discovered back in 1990 when they have a classification. Uncle Sam only gives me 60% disabled. But I am a status that they call unemployable because I have an irritable bowel syndrome, which means you could call it diarrhea. And I've lived with that all my life, and theoretically, it's supposed to make you unemployable. Otherwise, who's going to hire you if you have to go to the bathroom? Now, it never really, well, it bothered me those years, but it didn't affect my employment. And down through the years, even now I go to the bathroom couple of times a day, 2 or 3 different times a day, and the doctors put me through all kinds of tests back in the 90s, 1990, and so on, and finally, about 10 years ago, they said you're unemployable. I said, but I'm retired. They said that doesn't make any difference. You had this for years, and nobody would have hired you. You had a job where it didn't make any difference, and you got away with it. But to you, it's as far as we're concerned, you're unemployable. That's a very generous allotment they give me.
So the contents of the bread they felt damaged your gastrointestinal?
That's correct. Yeah. And they said there's no medicine for it. Yeah. And I'm still living with it today. I've been to the bathroom once now. I'm surprised it hasn't happened to me again.
So keep telling us about Luckenwald. Any other folks that were there?
Well, Luckenwald was the bottom. One of the things that happened there that surprised me, there were German guards around there. They used to walk around like they did in any camp, and the Italians did. With their guns slung, rifles slung. They weren't going around like this here looking for somebody. They were slung. And one day in April, just about 10 days before the Russians drove out, a little German guard saw me. I was out walking by myself. And he sidled up to me, and he says, "Your president is dead." And that was when Roosevelt died, at Forum Springs.
How'd that affect the troops?
Well, I don't know.
Did you believe him?
Yeah, well, I believed him, yes. We used to get the radio, and we finally got it. But on the radio, we used to get we never lost the radio, even in Luckenwald. But that's how I heard about Roosevelt. He says, "Your president is dead," and I remember that.
What did you think of that? He was your president for your whole life, almost.
Yeah, and I thought that was my first. Joe, my first vote. You had to be 21 in those days to vote. And I missed 1936. I was about 4 months short of being 21 when I was a senior in college. So I got my first vote in 1940, which was Roosevelt's third term. Broke the whole well-established 2 terms for every president. We never had, for 200 years, we haven't had any essential men without which we couldn't get along, except Roosevelt, who said this war is on, and I have to run for the third. I told myself, this is my first vote. I said, you aren't God, you. And I resented that more than I can tell you. I said, we don't need any good guy. Nobody is essential, not anybody. We've gone along with 200 years, and it's tough going. And we don't really need you to stick around here. You had your New Deal, and 2 or 3 of your best New Deal programs were declared unconstitutional, and they were. The 3AA and the NRA, the 2 major things were declared unconstitutional. I said, we don't really need you, not that much. And of course, the public thought differently, and he got elected 3 times and then 4 times. The 4th time he ran as a cadaver. That was his feeling of the world needed him, even though he was half dead. He said, "I'm going to run for president for the 4th time."
He was pretty sick at that time.
He was so damn. He was too sick to run, but he said, "I'm the essential guy. You can't get along without me." And I resented it. But
who executed the war when he was that ill? Was there other people that were really essential?
I'll tell you, Harry Hopkins was one of his buddies. Now, one of the tragedies of what the answer to your question is, he had substituted Harry Truman. He was his vice president for that 4th term. Now, this is important. And it was that spring of 1945, was it not, that they decided they were going to use the atom bomb? And then he died. Truman didn't even know that there was an atom bomb. He had not been taken into his account as the Vice President of the United States.
Despite Roosevelt's illness, he didn't entrust Truman with that. That's interesting.
Not even with the way. That was the essence of Roosevelt's ego. And I was the one who tasted it the first time, and then when he ran for a third term, and I resented it, I voted for a guy named Wendell Willkie. But he was so egotistical. He was a cadaver when he ran, and he never. Poor Truman was faced with that decision of how to handle the Japanese, and he turned out to be a pretty good president. And Roosevelt had kept everything secret from him. I have deeply resented that.
Yeah. Well, and thus we now have a two-term presidency, which is probably for the better.
It's a constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
We're not going to have that anymore.
Yeah.
And
So you're in Luckenwald.
we're in Luckenwald now, and one of the other interesting things, other than that, was where I first heard about Roosevelt, was that there were a lot of POWs there from all the camps, and there was a bunch of Norwegians in a compound right near ours. And they'd been there for a long, long time, so they had established all kinds of relationship with home and with the local Germans, and they had some stuff that they, just by being there, they had their hands on.
They became locals almost.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. You stick around long enough, you have resources. You do, and they helped us, and we helped them. And when the time came when the Germans left, that was a very interesting situation, because it could have been a disaster of 35,000 guys, and the Germans leave. If there had been a fight there, it could have been a real disaster. But the local Germans were real smart about it, and gentlemanly about it, and smart about it. They realized that there was going to come a time when they were going to have to get out of there, and that this could be a disaster. So they had a conference with the leaders of the biggest groups, mostly the Americans, met with the German commandant, and they worked out a system that when the Germans left, he would transfer the operation of this camp over on an orderly basis to these POWs and this group of leaders, and be orderly about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they worked out a plan. I can remember that the day that they did leave, the Russians were just down the road a piece, and the German troops were prepared to walk out, and the German officer came out, and the American officer came up to see him, and they shook hands, and they saluted, and the Germans left. And the plan that they had, I had to go outside the camp and patrol up and down on the main road to keep people in. I said, no, don't leave. This is under good order. I thought they were going to tell me to go to hell, but nobody did. And the next morning, the Russians came in.
So the Russians liberated you.
Yes, the Germans liberated us by leaving the day before. Now the Russians knocked down all the fences. There were a lot of Russian prisoners there. The Russians had not signed the Geneva Convention for taking care of POWs. The rules of POWs, which had been acted by the League of Nations in 1929. So the Germans had just really mistreated the Russians, prisoners, because there was no rules for the Russians. They haven't signed this thing. Mm-hmm. So they were being mistreated like crazy. And of course, when the Russian army came in, they closed the camp off except for the Russians. They knocked down the Russians' barracks and set the Russians free. And of course, they just raided the countryside. Mm. Now, Germany's already getting ready to collapse now, but they wouldn't let us out. All the rest of us were kept inside the camp because the war was not over yet, and the Russians were real GI about this. They said, when this war is over, you will be liberating some of our guys, and we've liberated some of your guys, so we'll exchange you. But between now and then, you guys got to stay where you are. They took out the sick prisoners. This is thousands of guys now, thousands of guys. They took out the sick ones. They let a lot of food come in. There was one day that I saw they unloaded a cow. You know, they live off the land. The Russian army doesn't have a food program for their army. They carry their own women too, by the way. I have pictures of their women. And they brought in. I saw them take the lid off the rear of the truck, and they pushed out a cow, and they said, "That's your meal."
Here, go to it.
Butcher the cow. I go, oh, geez, what a day those were. Those are great times. So, and we had all the Americans were organized, the POWs were organized, getting ready to, if the Russians ever changed their minds, we could get out of there on an orderly military fashion. And the interesting thing about that is they wouldn't discuss that. The Russians wouldn't discuss that with our people. And this was behind the Elbe River line. This was in the Russian zone, obviously. And the American army was, and the British army were across the Elbe and patrols, and in other words, Germany was collapsing, and there were some of our guys across in the Russian zone, and little by little, the higher authorities of the Americans began to find out that this camp was there. In other words, the word came back through the Luckenwald. There's thousands of guys there. So now you get the regimental guys and the divisional guys and army guys. And pretty soon, the negotiations now are at the highest level. When are we going to let those guys out? You know, and the Russians would not do it. They wouldn't even discuss it in camp. They just kept you at the main gate. So every day there was lesser of our guys there. They were sneaking away at night. Yeah. And one day, after about two weeks of that, I had one of my buddies, Bob Savage, whom I'd gotten to know on the truck, on the boxcar. And there was a young junior officer walked around the outside of the camp, outside the rail, outside the barbed wire, and he was with one of the groups who was negotiating up at the main gate, and he came up and he said, "What are you guys still doing here?" He says, "There's a lot of American vehicles around here, you know, this is out in the country." He said, right in the town of Luckenwald, which is just a mile from here, he said, "I know there's some vehicles down there. Why don't you just leave?" And of course, this was daytime. And I guess we must have gone back to the barracks because I took some things with me. Maybe I already had the notebook that led to this, in this bucket up here. So we decided we would go. We crawled under the barbed wire, Bob Savage and I, and started to run. And there was a the Russian patrol guy down the line, and he saw us, and he fired up into the air, tried to bluff us back in. And we kept running. Of course, the lay of the land was pretty soon we were so we just ran for a few hundred yards, and we were on the side of everything. And we just ran, crawled out of the barbed wire, and we got down to the edge of Luckenwald, little German town, and we started to see some houses. And we heard a voice calling to us. Looked back, and here was a house, and there was a GI all dressed up standing on the porch. He says, "You guys looking for those trucks?" And we said, "Yep." He says, "I know where they are." What had happened, he was one of the GIs that had left the camp before I said some of these guys were sneaking out. They would go to a German family, and they would be their insurance policy in case the Russians tried to get even. They were getting even with Germany. You know?
Oh, okay.
So if that German family took in an American like that, when the Russians came, they'd back off. He said, "This guy," he said, "I've been living here for a while." He said, "It's time to go." And he said, "I saw those vehicles come in." He said, "I saw you two guys." So he said, "I'll take you down there." He showed us that. Now I'm going to tell you what happened now. At the edge of the town, on the side street, there were 6 GI trucks, and it was in command of a sergeant, an American sergeant, a real rough and ready GI sergeant. And I remember now I looked like a bum. In other words, I'd been on that boxcar and I'd been living from potatoes to potatoes. I just looked terrible. I was wearing British paddle dress. And my clothes were dirty, and I don't know whether I'd shaved. I thank God I had my dog tags, because this sergeant said, and we had to prove to him who we were, because we just looked like bums. But he said, this is where I have to impose on you. He said, my orders are to take Americans, British, Canadians, and no fucking French. If that goes on their ear, you can edit that out. That was the way he put it. Now, what happened then was we loaded up the trucks, and the Russians had sent in some food, these K rations, which were 1 meal things waxed in parcels that were carrying it for 1 meal at a time. And I had one of each in my British paddle dress. So we got on these trucks, we headed towards the American lines. And I can remember saying to Bob, I said, it looks like we're going to make it. You know? I said, why don't we just eat those darn things? And we ate them. And then we got up to the Elbe River, and there was a Russian pontoon bridge across, and we could see the Americans on the other side. And I said, you suppose they're going to let us across their bridge? That's a Russian bridge. They wouldn't let us out of the camp. Are they going to let us over? If we could see the Americans over there. Well, they let us over. And you will be surprised when I tell you that that was VE Day.
It was May 8th?
May 7th.
7th?
Now, there were 3 VE days. The 7th, which was the day, that's the way that they signed the papers up in Reims, up in France. The next day, when those guys signed the papers, they declared the 8th is to be the end of the war. But the day they signed the papers was the 7th.
7th, okay.
And then the 9th was, so the Russians said, you got to have one for us. And they had another celebration in Berlin on the 9th. But the real VE Day, when they signed the papers, was May 7th. And that's the day Bob Savage and Don Waful crossed from being a POW to freedom.
To freedom again. So free at last. How'd that feel?
Unbelievable.
You knew you made it at that point.
Yeah, he's one of those GIs over there. The 30th was the 30th Infantry Division.
Oh, that's great. A great day.
30th Infantry Division. And one of the guys said, "What can we get for you?" And I said, "Get me some orange juice." I had no fruits for 3 years. No apples, oranges, grapes, banana, anything of a fruity nature for 3 years.
Yeah.
And I said, "Get me some orange juice."
All right, let's pick it up from last talked about VE Day for Mr. Waful.
Yep.
Let's take it from there.
One of the interesting little bypasses about that day, Bob Savage and I, we were back, obviously, with the American Army, and with all kinds of food. This little German town, which is called Schönebeck, was its name, at the Elbe River, Schönebeck. It's on the maps. There are bakeries in that little town, and they were in pretty good. They weren't making the German bread, the POW bread. They were making real bread.
Flour bread.
Flour bread. Their bakeries were open part-time. Savage and I bought a loaf of German bread just in case the American Army ran out of food.
I guess after you've been hungry for a while, you think about that a little bit more, don't you?
Can you imagine that? There was no way that was going to happen, but we didn't need that bread in that quarter. It needed 6 legs, but we bought it because we could do it, and we can't tell whether for sure where our next bread is coming from.
Well,
so we'll buy one.
Is your outlook on food been different ever since?
No,
Yeah.
but that was that difference. So they finally, after we stayed there maybe a week with those guys, right up on the front lines. That was when Eisenhower said, we're not going to take Berlin. we'll let the Russians have Berlin. He says, I'm not going to. He says, my orders were to destroy the German army. And he said, I have done that up to the Elbe River, us and the British. We have destroyed the German army. My orders were not necessarily to take Berlin. Let the Russians take it, and I'm not going to spend 50,000 guys to take that. So let the Russians have it. That was Eisenhower. So there, the American army was done. The Elbe River and the British army were right up to the Elbe. If you look on the map, the Elbe River was like this, and we closed in, and that was the end. We never won. They didn't cross the Elbe and go whatever. Let the Russians have it. That was Eisenhower. Anyway, we started off now back through channels. We went through. We had a convoy of maybe 7 or 8 jeeps full of POWs like me and Bob. And we went through 3 or 4 German cities, big cities. Braunschweig, Magdeburg, Zerbst, 2 or 3 other smaller sites. These are big cities, and they were flat to the ground. They bulldozed out the roads down the middle, the bricks and so on, so down the main street so the jeeps could get through. But they were, so I have seen the German cities like that just leveled. The way we drove through just it was amazing. They took us to a place called an Air Force. It's on the map. There's a place called Hildesheim. There was a big airport there, and that was a forward zone that the Army, when it was active, would fly in supplies and personnel and so on to Hildesheim and then truck it up to the fronts. And so that there was a hospital there and an airport there, obviously. So they took us to Hildesheim, and and we stayed there overnight. There was this GI hospital there, and I walked over to the hospital, and I wanted to check with some of their people if they ever knew where the 5th General Hospital was. That was Cassie's hospital. I had no idea where she was. I hadn't seen her. I hadn't talked to her or anything. No contact for 6 months.
So this is Cassie, the nurse that you met in.
Yes.
Where did you meet her first?
In North Ireland, Belfast.
North Ireland. Okay.
But
so now you're looking for her.
Yeah, now I'm looking for her, and we've been corresponding, but nothing had happened from say January when we left. When we left, we walked out of Poland in January. And I talked about before I got in the boxcar. From that point on in January, there was no contact between us. Mm-hmm. She lost track of where we were, and we never did know where she was. So we had now 5 months, 6 months with no contact. And I had no idea where the hospital was, her hospital. So I wanted to know if anybody there knew anything about the 5th General Hospital. I talked with one of their nurses. And one of the sidelights about that was, Joe, I hadn't talked to the woman now in 3 years when I contacted this gal. And I didn't know how to do that.
You didn't know how to talk to a woman? You kind of forgot?
Yeah. Your line of your conversation gets a little lousy. You don't think about it.
A little rough.
Yeah. You don't even think about it. And she sensed that. She sensed that, and she said she didn't know. She said, "How would you like a brownie?" And she invited me into her tent, and she gave me a brownie and some Coke, I guess.
So you found her?
No.
Okay.
She didn't know. All she did was sense that I was an ex-POW, that I was having trouble getting rehabilitated, and she says he needs some TLC, and she got me a brownie. So then we got on the next day. We flew out of Hildesheim. We flew over the Rhine River, and I saw that famous cathedral at Cologne, which Cologne had been bombed and bombed and bombed and bombed. But that huge cathedral, they were still there. It was damaged, but it was still standing up. All the bridges in the Rhine, there's lots of them, all down. And that big cathedral's still there. The Lord was taking care of that. It was damaged, but I could see it from that airplane.
So despite there was carnage all around it, but the cathedral didn't get hit.
It got damaged, but it was still standing. Now, back in 1942, Cologne was the target on Britain's first 1,000 plane raid on Germany was Cologne in 1942. So it had been going bombed in 42, 43, 44, and 45. The city was gone. The bridges were all gone, and the cathedral was still standing there, damaged but still alive. Amazing.
That's something.
So they took us into to Reims, and when we stopped there for a while, part of a day. That was where the original papers were signed at the surrender, and Ike's train was parked in that railroad station. That office where they signed was in the railroad station, and Ike's train was there, and we could look in because he had all kinds of offices in there, these staff guys. So we saw Ike's train, and we could look in the offices. We couldn't look at the building where these papers had been signed, but we knew where it was, and we saw it. So then they took us into some trucks, and by this time it was dark. And we went out to this place called the Lucky Strike. A huge, huge camp, and it was growing by the minute. And we had a couple of trucks, and when the driver got to this place in the middle of the night, he said, get out of the truck. He says, there's piles of cots around here, and there's tents around here. He said, grab yourself a tent, a cot, and get in one of the tents, and I'll see you later. He took off. He just dumped us out. So you went around in the dark and picked up a cot that was folded up, found an empty tent, and went in and got some sleep. Woke up in the next morning and said, where the hell are we? And somebody said, well, I said the chow tents were running 24 hours a day, 24 hours a day. And they said, we said we got to find those the food tent, because and when we'd get in the line and go through the chow line, and I'd go back and do it again. Never could. And of course, a lot of the guys were sick too from eating like that.
Just eating too much.
Eating too much all at once. Oh man. So that went on for a while, but anyway, it stabilized itself for over the next week or so. You'd move from one camp to another. You'd meet somebody, say, "Gee, there's Charlie." He says, "Come on over here. Bill's here too. Tony's here." I'll pick up my cot and move from one tent to another, and we started to stabilize a little bit, and and I started getting some clothes, and I got a chance to finally get shaved. I found out who the hell I was. Brushed my teeth. So one day after, I guess maybe a couple of weeks, the way time passes, the Red Cross had set up a tent, and the Army had set up a hospital there too because of the sick guys. Anyway, the Red Cross had set up this tent, and I went up to the tent and I introduced myself, and I said I'm trying to track down the 5th General Hospital. So by golly, they went to work on that. The Red Cross can do anything. They contacted the telephone exchange and military exchange in Paris, and she was way over in Alsace-Lorraine, almost in Germany. She'd been in the Bulge. And we got her on the phone. She could hear me and I could hear her, but we couldn't actually communicate with each other. But all we did was, I knew that where she was and that she was alive, and she knew where I was and I was alive. Can you imagine what that meant?
That was a great day.
Oh, man. Well, it gets worse or better. I said, man, isn't that great? And I should tell you, too, we're not missing any bases here. The reason they set up Lucky Strike was back in 1940, the RAF had built a concrete airstrip out in the middle of nowhere for emergency landing for any airplanes that were in combat or any reason that needed an interim place just to get down on the ground. There was nothing there except an airstrip. So they built this, they put up these tents around Lucky Strike around that thing because they were flying some guys in as well as these trucks. So it was a central place to gather around. 1940 airstrip. So, I was grateful to the Red Cross that they found where she was. But we hadn't done anything about it. See, so I went back, and another week went by. You won't believe this. Another week went by, and I went back to that same tent. And I was going to see if we couldn't get through another telephone message to her. And there was a little outer room there, a table and a chair. And while I was waiting for this girl, the Red Cross girl, there was a piece of paper sitting on this table with a telephone, or the written message. And it was my name and Cassie's name on that piece of paper. You aren't going to believe this. And then the Red Cross girl came up, and she says, "Are you Waful?" And I said, "Yep." And she says, "Your girlfriend, we've been looking for you. Your girlfriend is due here today at that hospital. Today."
Wow.
So I rushed across the camp on foot to that hospital and checked in at the command tent. And I saw the commanding officer, Colonel Zimmerman. And he said, "Yes." He said, "We've been expecting that girl. She's in the Havre right now. She's due out here. She'll be here tomorrow." And then he looked at me and he said, "You're a POW." He said, "I've got one of those big air mattresses, that blow up." He said, "How would you like to sleep on that air mattress tonight?" He said, "You could wait around till tomorrow until she gets here." So I slept within the colonel's air mattress that night, better than the ground or better than a cot,
yeah.
better than we'd ever had for 2 or 3 years.
What a great guy.
Yeah, he was. He ended up giving her away in our wedding, Colonel Zimmerman. He's in the pictures. Nice guy. I often wonder whatever became of him. So the next day, I waited around all day long, just hung around. And there's thousands of POWs all around this camp. In the hospital, it was a buzz. The whole thing was buzzing. And finally, along about 4 or 5 o'clock, an ambulance drove up. Open, out she stepped. She got out of the ambulance. And she saw me, and I saw her, and I rushed and hugged her. And she said to me, she said, "You still want to get married after 3 years?" And I said, Yep, I do. And so we looked up, I knew where Bob Savage was. Now, the Army at that point in time didn't give a damn about she was the first lieutenant I was thinking that wanted to get married. The war was just over. All these outfits now were getting ready to pack up and go home and go to the Pacific. Mm-hmm. And the Army was in a hurry up mode. And 2 second lieutenants said they want to get married. They said, "Come on, get out of here." And so she said, "Let us get married." And then she sensed right away, too. She'd been working with wounded soldiers for so long, of all kinds, and wounded prisoners. She'd sensed that I was having trouble getting used to perfume and the female touch. Mm-hmm. And she said, "I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it." So we went to see the chaplain. And he said, "You got to wait 90 days. She says, "We've been waiting 3 years. We're just not going to wait anymore." So to make a long story short, Bob Savage was there. And then we bumped into another lieutenant colonel who had been in 0564, and we told him what we were doing. And to make a long story short, he went to the headquarters of this camp, the office that was running this camp at the moment, and got the proper papers. And he flew it to a certain place to get them signed. And Bob Savage went out in the countryside and found a little village that had a mayor, and who would conduct the ceremony, even though he didn't speak any English. We got an interpreter. Colonel Zimmerman said he'd do it. and this other guy who had all the papers, and in 48 hours we had a ceremony. And we got married, and we got a gal from that nurse from that hospital there. We never saw her again. She was the matron of honor. Zimmerman said, "I'll give her away," and Zimmerman said he got a hold of his senior non-com that ran the mess hall for the hospital. He said, "I want the best dinner you ever put together in your life, and we're going to have a dinner for these people."
You had a reception.
Oh, did we ever! I had the first drink of whiskey I ever had in my life. It was a bottle of champagne. So we had this ceremony in French, had an interpreter. I've got pictures of that. And we were married. And where we spent, I can't really explain to you where we spent on our wedding night. It was just unbelievable. In a castle in France, someplace that was filled with soldiers and POWs. And I had a section that for itinerant officers, you know, a place where you, like a hotel or a motel. And we had been told that there was always somebody, some place that was empty, and you just go there and use it. You don't need a reservation. So we went there, and that was a weird night. I wouldn't want that. But we got through it. The next day we went to Paris. And we had a day in Paris and stayed at a nice hotel. We had an experience in Paris that was exciting. At the airports and the railroad stations in Paris had been taken over by the army. You know, in other words, you couldn't go to a hotel, but you had to go through the building section, particularly service people. So when we took the train from where we were married, we got off the train in Paris, and we went to this booking office run by the Army. And Cassie had a little suitcase, and I had a laundry bag with all my early belongings over my shoulder. And we went over there, and I said, "We want a room." And this sergeant says, "Oh, yeah?" "Oh, yeah." And I said, "Wait a minute, and then we got out the marriage license, and he said, "Okay." He said, I'll take it." He says, "Oh, yeah." So we got a hotel room. The next day we took off. She had a 5-day change of duty just to go up there, and then we had to hurry back to where she was, back in Alsace-Lorraine. So we went back there, and they didn't have a place for married nurses, obviously. So I had to sleep in the bachelor's officers' quarters, and the girls would invite. I always spent the nights and evenings up in their room with the nurses. They all had chocolate and champagne, and we had a great reunion with all those nurses that I knew from North Ireland. We had a great time, but she had to go back on duty. And we did that for a few days, and then when I'd say goodnight to her and go down to the bachelor's officers' quarters.
Yeah.
So to make a long story shorter, we were there 2 or 3 days, and we wanted to go to the Riviera for the honeymoon. That couldn't be done, but they fixed us up with a week in Luxembourg. Luxembourg, the Duchy, a beautiful city. Luxembourg is a gorgeous city. We went there, and we stayed at a nice hotel, and the Red Cross had flowers there for her. And we spent a week there. And then we came back, and she had to go back on duty, and I had to go back to the bachelor's officers' quarters. So she had crazy hours, you know, so we had some picnics. After 2 or 3 days of that, I said, "Look, this is crazy." I said, I haven't been home in 3 years. I've never met your family. I said, "I'm going home." I said, "They won't let you come home with me. You're my wife now. They won't let you come."
So could you get out of the
But
service?
I'm a free soul. I wasn't assigned to anybody. I was just running around loose. And I said, "I'm going home." And so one of my favorite pictures, it's in the railroad station in Toul. And you can see a couple of GIs in the background there, the Yardbirds.
Yeah.
And I'm standing on the train steps saying goodbye to her. and taking her picture. I don't know, the switch came before after, but she did the same thing for me. I gave the camera to her, and she stepped on it, and she took up a day. I don't know where that is, but that's the picture that I said goodbye to her.
Oh, okay.
And she's staying behind.
Yeah, and we'll put that in this when you see the video. You'll see it.
So I went back to Camp Lucky Strike, and by golly, all the POWs had gone. The whole thing had been taken over by a regular Army unit, which is getting ready to go back to the States and go to Japan. There was one little corner of it that was still for wandering POWs like me. In fact, Eisenhower had put a notice in, the Army newspaper, Stars and Stripes?
Yeah. Well,
he had put an article in that, kind of a real editorial, front page above the fold. Would you please, the ex-POWs, please come back and quit sightseeing. We were trying to get the troops out of here, and we know you guys are going back to your outfits and go sightseeing. I know you're having a great time, but come on, please come back. And that was what I was doing, see?
Yeah. Well, you had been in captivity for so long.
That's right. So we now also at the same time, when we just a couple of days after our marriage, the Stars and Stripes had a reporter at our wedding, and we had a front page story, which I also have in my scrapbook here. Lieutenants hunt each other for 4 days, then marry. And we're on page 1 of the Stars and Stripes all over Europe. Just she and I.
Wow, that's quite a love story.
Yeah, it is. And so I came back to the States. Took 13 days to come. It took 5 days to go over on the Queen Mary. 13 days to come back on the old, one of those factory vessels. The won the war for us because they just built them one a day and filled them up with stuff and took them across the ocean. Well, they just kind of made a troop ship out of it took us home. And so I got in my car and I drove up to Framingham, Massachusetts, and rang the doorbell of her home, and I said, "Well, I'm your new son-in-law."
So how did that go? What did they say?
Fine. Because when we got married, we sent telegrams to our parents. Not that we were thinking about getting married. What do you think? We just said, "We are married." And so her mother and father, she spoke broken English. She had 2 sisters, younger sisters. They spoke good English. They treated me like royally. It's 2 months later, 60 days later, she got home. That's quite a story.
Yeah.
So
now, were you home permanently, or were you?
Well, no, I had 60 days leave. The war was still on. They gave me 60 days leave. I spent every night at the ballpark.
And here, and what city?
Right here.
In Syracuse?
Yeah, this is home. This is where I was raised, and my mother was still alive, my stepdad. And I wrote her a letter every day. Nobody was home. Went back to church, and at the end of the 60 days, they assigned me to the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina. It's a distinguished country place, still open. Beautiful place, Asheville. If you ever hear of Asheville, the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, it's great. The Army was operating those for recovered POWs, and I reported there. They'd given me 60 days leave, and so that I was going to report there for reassignment because the war's still on. And they finally let Cassie come home. I've got pictures of her on the ship coming back. She came back in the Queen Mary, and she went through Fort Dix like crazy to get on the train to get down to Grove Park Inn to see me. She got there with 1 day left to go, and I've got the bill from the Grove Park Inn for her for 1 day, $1.25. That was my bill at the Grove Park Inn for 1 day for her, $1.25.
Wow.
Oh man, they wouldn't even buy a postage stamp out there anymore. So it was right at that point in time that the atom bomb dropped.
That's August.
Then the second one dropped, and all of a sudden the war is over, and she's down there, and so they just they looked at our records right there at Asheville and said, "You guys got more than enough points for discharge. You're not going anyplace. Just get back to Fort Dix, and get out of the Army right now.
Yeah.
So we got on a train and went to Washington, Fort Dix. We got discharged together and went home.
You came back to, well, you brought her back to Syracuse.
I brought her back to Syracuse, and then she went home. She came back to see my family first, and then we went up to and saw her family, and then we started being Mr. and Mrs.
Interesting. Well, obviously the war changed your life in a significant way with that story, but any other thoughts on how the war changed your life and made you a different person?
Well, experiences like that, it can't help but have some effect. I can't tell you precisely what the changes were. I was older, I was in love, I was married, I survived, and you add all that up, and I was a new person living a new life, and darn lucky, and the Lord taking good care of me. And here I am starting another life, and life can be beautiful. And you survive the things, and your friends and your faith that never leave you. And
right now, as we said, you're 100 years old.
Yeah.
100 years old. Yeah.
And I live on those memories that I've shared with you.
Yeah.
And all those people are now gone. Because we used to have POW reunions a lot.
Yeah.
We used to have them every 2 years, and then we enjoyed those so much we had them every year. We had them all over the country, reunions. We would draw up to 125, 130 people. The last one was held a couple of years ago. There were 2 guys there. The rest were all dead.
Yeah.
There's one of my buddies, he was only 20 years old, and he's a POW. He's 92 years old now, and he's still active. He lives down in Virginia.
Yeah.
Wilbur Sharp.
What did you miss most when you were away from home? When you came back, what is it do you think you really missed the most?
What, back here?
Yeah.
Well, you can't answer that question. I don't think I'd ask you. I don't think you should ask you that question. It's kind of a little bit corny, because you could say, well, I miss home and cooking and going to ball games and so on. It's just too deep. You grow up, you become a better person. You can't say, well, I miss going to Sunday school, and I miss the lunches out with somebody, and I miss going to ball games, and I miss that's too obvious, you know. But you're older. You better have a better. You certainly do have a better appreciation. Maybe there is an answer. You have a better appreciation of what America is, and what home is, and what neighbors are, and what church is, and what civic life is, and what America is. Start with number America. How blessed we are. Because a lot of the guys, including me, when we got off the ship and back in where we all kissed the ground. And one guy said, because, you know, the Statue of Liberty, you know, faces out to sea. Mm-hmm. He says, the next time I see that thing, she better turn around. I want to. She said, I'm never going to see the backside of the Queen. Home.
Yeah.
The appreciation of America. I still feel that today in America. My first prayer every night now is, don't let America change. I'm afraid as hell that it will change if this election doesn't go. If Bernie Sanders gets his way, and he's going to. Hillary's adapted the Bernie Sanders giveaway. And that's what's going to happen. She's going to, if she wins, she's going to appoint all those Supreme Court judges. Mm-hmm.
You can see what they're going to do with the gun, some of the Second Amendment on guns.
Yeah.
They want to take the guns away from you. They don't want you to have a gun.
What's your thought on that? I mean, you're a proponent of that, the Second Amendment, I'm not sure, but
You got it. We had a Second Amendment because there was a time back in the early days when it was before lawful took over, that people had a right to defend their own home. And they weren't. They were. The guns weren't to go out and shoot people. They were to defend your home against it. And we still have a right to. That still exists, not to defend your home, but you have a right to hold a pistol because it's part of being an American. You're allowed. You got to have rules. But the fact that you've got a gun doesn't mean that you're a bad guy and going to use it to shoot somebody. And they want to take the gun away from you. Not it's just there to defend yourself. And if somebody wants to, you have a right to defend yourself. The other side says we can't trust you to have a gun. Guns shoot people. Well, guns don't shoot people. Bad guys shoot people. Guns don't. They just lay in the drawer.
yeah.
But the thought of the executive order, because Hillary's already said that if she doesn't get what she wants through the Congress, she's going to do it on executive order. And Barack Obama issued lots of executive orders because he didn't get his stuff. So I'm worried about that.
Okay.
And of course, she used to. She finally admitted, that when she made a bunch of mistakes. Now her mistakes have changed to short circuits. She doesn't make mistakes now. Things happen and facts get short circuited. In other words, they change because they get short. It's not a mistake anymore. And there's some bitterness in my voice there.
Sure. Well, we're very interested in what somebody that's fought for our country thinks
Well,
about our country today.
She said, she had that I saw that interview she had with Chris Wallace, and he debated with her what she had said, and it was different. Anyway, she said it could be that Chris and I were talking past each other. We weren't understanding each other, talking. You're not listening to me, and I'm not listening. Yeah. That's bullshit, And she said we got short-circuited. Anyway, okay.
Well, tell me, you have, yes, we get to the end here. I want to make sure we didn't leave anything out. Is there other things? You've got a picture of Megyn Kelly there that we'll add later on. Can you tell us about your interaction with Megyn Kelly? You're both from, now Megyn Kelly, to set the record, lived in Syracuse as a child, correct?
Well, I tell you what intrigued me about her, right? Originally, was that she's not only a Syracuse native, but she's a Syracuse University gal. And that intrigued me. And I've always been close to Syracuse University. I have a graduate there, I have a master's degree there.
And we're not far from there right now.
And I'm not far from there. And my boss was the insurance agent for Syracuse University. And when I joined him in 1946, I got to know through him everybody from Chancellor Tolley down through everybody, Ben Schwartzwalder and the football staff and the admissions office and all the officials at SU. They were the athletic directors. And those are the original days of WAER, the original days that the communications that became Newhouse. They used to run out of the old library. I knew all those people. The University College, which is in the old med school. They brought a guy here from Canada to run that, and he's going to be 100 this year. He and I have been friends ever since. So I knew it, and I taught for 4 semesters over at University College. So Syracuse University has been a part of me forever. And when it comes to the football program, I've never missed a game in the Dome. I've seen every one. And I've seen all but 3 since 1946 of the local games, not the road games, but the home games. I've missed 3 home games since 1946. How many years is that, 70? But in fact, I've got my tickets down. I've got it all signed out, so somebody come and drive me. We take the shuttle. So Syracuse is part of my life. So when I realized that Megan Kelly was not only a Syracuse girl, then I learned. I said I didn't believe that she didn't get in a new house, and she didn't. How people would turn her down. But she then switched over. She went to the Maxwell School of Citizenship, got a master's degree, and that's where I am. That's the Maxwell School. That's one of the famous schools in America, is SU's Maxwell School of Public Affairs, and she has a master's there. And then also she's a Theta, and my number 2 wife, whom I married some years later, was with her 9 years, she was a Theta. So he was a couple of generations there, but she's the sorority sister of my second wife. And so I have all these friends over at SU, some of them that I've gotten to know on a personal basis, and particularly a guy named Rob Enslin, who was a writer at SU, a very fine writer, and he's a hell of a trombone player. And I got to know him through music. I've played trombone with him, and we see each other a lot. And he knows all these people at the university. And I've gotten to meet some of the people at Newhouse. A couple of the faculty members belong to our church. And some of those guys over there have been customers of mine. So I have an affiliation, a medal one, the actual one with Newhouse. So it all adds up to, here's a gal like Megan Kelly, who went from being, she's a lawyer, I don't know if you know that or not. She went to Albany Law School, practiced law for 8 years, and she's got a book coming out. She's got a $6 million advance on a book, and it's entitled Try Something Better. And she was a lawyer for 8 years and said, I got tired of it and tried broadcasting, and now she's the best in the business.
You enjoy watching her show?
Oh, she runs that show like she owns it, like she's a lawyer, and she stood Trump on his ear. He tried to pick a fight with her, and she met him blow for blow. Yeah. She's a very smart gal, and she left me a beautiful message on my birthday. I read that thing before we go home today. Mm-hmm. She says, "Dear Don, happy birthday," and then she goes on to says some more things. I've never met her, and I probably never will. I would just love to meet her. For Maxwell, SU, Syracuse, Theta, and I would just love to have a visit with her. But I've met Chancellor Tolley was a client of mine, and I've met Chancellor Severud, I guess, whatever it is. I've met him and talked with him. And
these are all chancellors from Syracuse University.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I got honored back in April, about the time of my birthday, when the ROTC had its 100th anniversary birthday, and they had a big celebration at the university, and they cut a cake, and I was invited to come and cut the cake with a saber and be a part of their celebration, which great. I did, and I have a picture that I was very honored to do that. I was never ROTC, but anyway, I have a lot of associations of loyalty to SU and its people. I knew Ben Schwartzwald. You've heard of Ben Schwartzwald, the
very famous coach.
Yeah, oh yeah, he was the best. He was a paratrooper. He jumped on Normandy. I don't know if you knew that or not. Yeah, he jumped on Normandy. And I took Cassie back. She was at Utah Beach, D+30. And that's an interesting part about my story, though, is that invasion that I'll tell you. She was at D+30, and she wanted to be there for that 50th anniversary. And I wanted to see all of the beaches, because, and this is the story, we knew out in Poland as POWs that we were going to win this war. There was no doubt about it, that we would win. We also knew from facts and what we were talking that we were going to have to invade the continent, invade Europe. And we knew that that was going to be a bloody, hard-fought battle, and it was going to cost us a lot of trouble and casualties. But we knew that it wasn't going to ever let us out of the jail over there, the POW, until it happened. Can you imagine the emotional churning that gives you? We got to get out of here, and you guys got to raid that beach and get the shit kicked out of you. Until that happens, we're going to stay here. It's a hell of a situation to be in mentally. And they did. The Utah Beach and Omaha Beach and all those beaches were just horrible things, but they were a success, and we won that war and we got home. But Cassie was part of it, and I wanted to see those beaches, all of them. Those beaches are 55 miles long. I don't know if you realize that or not. You take all the way from Cherbourg, Omaha, Sword, Juneau, the rest of them all the way up. It's 55 miles. And we went there, and I went down to every beach, and I walked on some of those beaches and some of those cemeteries, and saw the German cemeteries and 19-year-old German kids that were killed there. And saw where Cassie landed. I took her and I showed her Utah Beach, and I said, "That's where you landed." And she said, "I know it looks the same, except where are all those smashed up vehicles that were there when I was here?" And those girls for a week, had to live in the ambulances, and they lived out of their helmets, and they had no place to go to the bathroom until they built a hospital, those nurses, including my wife. So she wanted to go back, and so I took her. And we saw those beaches, and I saw them. But the emotion I'm saying to you about and we knew that we had news about that invasion actually happening because we had BBC radio at 1 o'clock in the morning, and those beaches had started. The German radio didn't have it till noon the next day. So we knew it before the German guards did out in Poland.
So you had to be delighted when that started.
Oh, yes. So the camp was euphoric, and the Germans couldn't figure out what all the excitement was.
Huh.
But I used to talk with Ben about that. He was a great customer. I used to deliver his policies at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He lived near Standish Drive. We talked about the war, and he was jumping. He had that one paratrooper that got caught in the tower up there. He's still there, by the way. They've got a flag and a blanket up there. That paratrooper got hung up in the church tower. It's still there.
Yeah.
I've got pictures of it. But those were great times, emotional times. When we went to Luxembourg, you know, the battle that happened after the beaches. That was Pat's headquarters was Luxembourg City, and we spent a week honeymoon there. Gorgeous town, great city, beautiful old-fashioned city. So I've had a hell of a life.
Well, since you've got back, you're a big part of our community. Maybe you could just kind of talk just briefly about some of the different things that you've done with the Syracuse Chiefs, and you know.
Well, one of the things that I've learned from my boss.
What was his name?
His name was L. Dieseroth, a good German name, Dieseroth. He was a very active guy in civic affairs of all kinds. He was a member of the Common Council. He'd been all kind. He was once chairman of the United Way campaign, and he did a lot of things. And he was very active in SU stuff. And he was Syracuse University's insurance agent, a big account to insure Syracuse University. He was one of the owners of the Syracuse Nationals, The NBA
Basketball team?
Yeah, he was one of the owners. Danny Bazzone was the principal, but L was one of the guys that backed him up and helped finance it. He was the guy that came up with my boss was one of the guys that made the Syracuse Chiefs a community-owned baseball club, and he helped form the Chiefs, and I was right at his elbow. And he used to say to me, I got active with the Chiefs, and he said, I wish you'd work as hard for me in the insurance business as you do for the ball club. Then they would both laugh and go to Cooperstown. Because he was the guy that thought of the idea of a community-owned club instead of individual families or individual groups owning it. He said, we're going to have the fans own it. And that's what they still do. And that was his idea. So I just kind of followed his style, and he liked the fact that it was easy for me to follow. I found out that I could do that. I could mix with people in clubs and in activities and things. It was I enjoyed it, and I did an awful lot of church work, Joe. I was active in the New York State Council of Churches. We built that state. It's now Giovanni out here across from Nottingham. That used to be the church center. That's the statewide church center. I helped build that darn thing. Every check that was paid to build that thing's got my name on it. I was a treasurer. I was just on the verge of being the state president of that council. So that's when my boss died, and I had to change that. So I just kind of followed in his footsteps, and it was kind of fun. I was active in the Junior Chamber of Commerce, which I don't think they have anymore. I was one of the vice presidents of the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And then I got to be president of the Chiefs. I don't know how that happened.
How long were you president of the Syracuse Chiefs?
35 years. I don't know how that. Well, I do know that. I do know how that happened, but it was. It happened. The boss of the Chiefs at that time was Ken Leach. My boss was L. Dezeroth was the third president. He wasn't the first president. He was the third president. But we had a guy that ran a big dairy in town, the Netherland Dairy, Ken Leach, and he died very unexpectedly in January of a given year. I think it was, I don't remember. Anyway, he passed away, and there was nothing in the bylaws that said about a successor by a vice president. And I'd been selling tickets, books of tickets, which I'm still doing. Sold $12,000 worth of tickets just last year to a bunch of people. And they said, well, we got to have a president. And somebody said, well, why don't we try Waful? He knows what's going on around here. He's been active in it. And I said, well, I can't do that. My boss just died, and we're changing this business. But this is an emergency. The regular vote's in October. I said, I'll write out Ken Leach's term and see what happens then if we settle this business of Al's death in the business. Well, it took 35 years. I never got over it. And we built that stadium. I don't know if you've ever seen it. You've seen it. There's a plaque up there on the concourse about all the county people, the Chiefs people that built this thing. You know, my name is up there, Don Waful, president. And it's been one of the funs of my life. The Toronto Blue Jays gave me that lovely watch when they won the World Series twice in a row.
Who gave that to you?
The Toronto Blue Jays.
Oh, the Blue Jays.
Yeah, that's a Tiffany watch. There's the Toronto logos in the middle. They won it twice in a row.
And we were the
farm
team
we were
for
them
for a long time.
Yeah, that's right. We kicked out the Yankees to take them out. I kicked out George Steinbrenner. I did. We did. I chaired the meeting, Joe. I chaired the meeting of the board of directors to decide whether we'd go with Toronto as a beginning club where you get everybody else's leftovers and kick out the prestigious New York Yankees and George Steinbrenner. You got to be nuts to do that.
Why'd you do that?
because we didn't like George, and we didn't like the way he treated us, and we knew the people up at Toronto, and it was the right thing to do. And I couldn't walk down Salina Street for a year. Well, you dumbass, what do you kick out the Yankees for? You know you're going to get your shirt. Well, it wasn't long before the Blue Jays won 2 World Series in a row, and I got a right in the spring. Steinbrenner would never come to Syracuse. He never visited us up here.
Yeah.
He wouldn't entertain anybody going down there. He would trade 2 or 3 guys off our club to get 1 major league club for them. In other words, he would strip the AAA club, which is us. You can't do that. Of course, they can do that because they own all those clubs. They own all those players. They were none of that. But he just didn't care for us. In fact, he thought he owned the club. He thought he owned the Chiefs, so we couldn't stand that. I've got a couple of letters in my scrapbook on the Yankee stationery to Dear Don, signed George.
Well, let me ask you a question here. We're coming to the end of the interview. Anything else you think you'd like to contribute to the interview, or is there any message you'd like to leave to the future folks that may be considering joining the service?
Yes, I can. I think you can make a case for some kind of military training of both men and women, particularly of men, somewhere between high school and college, somehow. I found that the feeling of belonging to the United States Army for our country and for myself and for what it stands for and what you learn and the skills that you learn and the discipline you have in terms of organizing your time and your thoughts and your efforts in some kind of an orderly fashion added up to a really important dosage and time in my life. You would have to hope that there wouldn't be a war, but I don't know how long. I have no idea how long that should be, whether it should be a year, but there's something about that military aspect of way of life and what it means to our country and to each individual, that there's some value to it that no other endeavor that you would be into, not even not if you're on a varsity sports team and you're the captain of a high school football, and it's just something about being in the service and what it means and what it can mean to you, just to be a part of it. I say good morning to those guys out there, that picture, the
Picture of
class number 3. Every morning I say, good morning, guys. They were my buddies. They were not the 1st Armored Division. I never got to know enough of those guys. I went to a couple of their reunions, didn't mean anything to me, but reunions with those guys, I lived with them. They were my buddies. And I had more fun with those guys and more friendships there. And it was just a closeness and a bond. And some of the guys that I knew, they're all gone now, except Wilbur Sharp at age 92. He was a good-looking 20-year-old. We used to make a girl out of him because he was so cute.
Well, very good.
You gonna want this?
Well, we'll
Or don't? If you don't want it, you tell me.
No, we'll take it with us. But I'd just like to finish up the interview
Fine.
at this
All right,
point.
I got a couple of things I ought to show you. Go ahead.
You've, as a witness to war, you've traveled far and seen much, and a grateful nation thanks you for your suffering as a POW and your service to our nation. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's been like I just said, it's been one of the joys of my life. Despite all the sorrows and the hardships, what it means, I got a lot out of it. Got a lot out of it. The fact that I didn't get killed or wounded, I was just lucky. But yeah, I got a lot out of it. Friends, and loyalties, and disciplines. And it was a good thing. And I think somewhere along the line, in some way you could do it. Yeah, there's a value to that. In my life there must be, and I just think if you could make it available to everybody.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you for your kindness.